Every year, tens of thousands of crashes happen on the long, empty highways that cut across the continent toward Alaska. Most of them have explanations: black ice, fatigue, bad weather, a split second of distraction. But then there are the others. Trucks found idling on the shoulder with the driver's seat empty. Rigs located hundreds of miles off their planned route with no fuel left and no footprints in the snow. Dash cams that record hours of normal driving, and then nothing but black for the final minutes before impact. Dispatchers chalk it up to human error. Insurance companies close the files. The reports get buried under paperwork and time. But out on the road, the stories keep circulating. Truck stops, late-night diners, lonely CB channels. Drivers talk and patterns start to appear. The same mile markers. The same stretches of highway. The same sense that something out there is watching the road, and sometimes it reaches in. Welcome to Voices from the Other Side. Here we collect those stories, the ones that don't fit neatly into police reports and safety manuals. If you enjoy true horror pulled straight from the darkest corners of the highway, don't forget to gently tap that like button, share this video with someone who drives at night, and subscribe so you don't miss the next voice calling from the other side of the road. Tonight, our journey north begins at the very edge of the map, a lonely stretch of asphalt leading toward Alaska, where time itself doesn't always behave the way it should. So settle in, dim the lights, and check your mirrors one more time. This is our first story of the night. Mile marker 0, the road that resets time. Logan Price wasn't supposed to be scared of the dark. Not after 8 weeks of training, not after backing a 70-foot rig into tight Seattle docks in the rain, not after all the safety videos about black ice and moose collisions and brake failure on mountain grades. Fear, his instructor had said, was fine as long as you respected it, as long as you didn't let it take the wheel. But at 2:12 a.m., on his 5th night alone on the Alcan Highway, fear slid into the passenger seat and buckled itself in. The dashboard clock clicked over to 2:13 a.m., and there it was again. Up ahead, on the right shoulder just beyond the reflective post that read Mile 0, sat the same rust-red pickup truck he'd already passed 3 nights in a row. Same angle in the snow. Same shattered taillight faintly reflecting his headlights. Same figure standing beside it. A woman in a parka with the hood up, one arm hugging herself, the other half raised like she wasn't sure whether to wave or hide. And the same sound even through his closed windows and the diesel hum. A thin, breaking sob that somehow made it through the glass and insulation and into his chest. Logan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The first night, he told himself it was coincidence. There were a lot of broken down vehicles on the Alcan. The second night, he told himself he was tired, that his mind was stitching old images onto new miles. The third night, he'd said nothing at all. He just stared straight ahead, knuckles white, while the woman's watery profile slid through the arc of his headlights and back into the dark. Now it was night 4. According to his GPS, he was nearly 600 miles farther north than he'd been when he'd first seen that pickup. According to his fuel gauge, he'd burned through 3 full tanks since then. According to his logbook, he'd crossed from British Columbia into the Yukon hours ago. And according to his eyes, he was still passing mile marker 0. He forced himself to look in the mirror as the pickup slipped behind him. There it sat, small and sad in his taillights, exhaustless, silent. The woman's face tilted toward his receding rig as if she knew he was looking back. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw his own reflection in her eyes, tiny, trapped, distorted. Then the road curved and she was gone. The CB was dead. Had been for hours. Occasionally a burst of static would crackle across channel 19, like someone half-pressing the talk button, then letting go. No voices. No chatter about moose on the road or DOT checkpoints or black ice. Just the sound of his own engine and the low white hiss of snow blowing across asphalt. He checked his mirrors again. Nothing but the long, empty ribbon of highway behind him. No headlights. No taillights. A straight shot of darkness back into the nothing he'd just driven from. Get a grip, he muttered, more to the truck than to himself. You're just tired. He tapped the brakes, feeling the loaded trailer settle. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. His electronic logbook glowed green beside him. Hours legal, rest breaks logged, everything by the book. Dispatch in Anchorage wanted the supplies by Friday, and he was on schedule. He glanced at the GPS. The small digital truck icon crawled along the line like an insect. Yukon Territory blinked in the corner of the screen. ETA to Anchorage, 16 hours. He looked at the mile marker outside. The last one he'd passed had still said 0. They shouldn't match, but they did. Again, Logan flicked the GPS off and on. The map vanished into black, then reappeared with the same information. Yukon Territory. Northbound. Everything normal. Except it wasn't. On a sudden impulse, he reached up and twisted the dashboard clock knob, rolling the minutes forward, then back. The digital numbers jumped, then settled. 2:14 a.m. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. The road unspooled ahead in a straight, unwavering line, the snowbanks like white walls holding him in. His eyelids felt heavy, but his mind crackled with a raw, sleepless edge. Finally, the clock slid toward 2:12 again. He swallowed. "If I see it again," he whispered, "I'll stop." The numbers flipped. 2:13 a.m. Up ahead, through the faint curtain of snow, a reflective post appeared on the right shoulder. The number glowed like a tiny green ghost. 0. The pickup came next, exactly where he knew it would be. Same rust-red body. Same collapsed front tire. Same woman leaning near the driver's door, shoulders shaking. Except this time as he approached, she did something new. She turned her head. Her hood slipped just enough for him to see pale skin, dark hair stuck to damp cheeks, eyes wide and shining in his headlights. Her mouth formed a word he couldn't hear, but he recognized it by shape. "Please." Logan hit the brakes. The trailer shuddered behind him, ABS barking, tires hissing on snow-dusted asphalt. The big rig slowed, then came to a hard, protesting stop 20 yards past the pickup. For a second, the only sound was the ticking of hot metal, the low, irritated rumble of the engine, and his own heart pounding in his ears. He'd just broken half a dozen things they'd drilled into him in training. Never stop on a narrow shoulder. Never get out on a blind curve. Never pick up strangers. And never, absolutely never, stop for something that doesn't make sense. But the loop, the clock, the same mile marker over and over, none of that made sense either. He flipped on his four-ways, grabbed his high-visibility jacket and opened the door. The cold hit him like a slap. Sharp, metallic, full of the smell of snow and pine and something else. Old exhaust, maybe, or frozen oil. The night pressed in around his truck, thick and heavy and strangely muffled. "Hey!" he called, stepping carefully down to the edge of the road. "You okay?" The woman didn't move. She stood beside the pickup, arms wrapped around herself, head bowed. The crying had stopped. He walked closer, boots crunching on the hard-packed snow. The reflective numbers on the post beside him caught his flashlight beam. 0 on one side, 0 on the other, as if direction didn't matter. As if everything started and ended right here. "Ma'am," he said, trying to sound confident, adult, not like a 23-year-old on his first solo run too far from home. "I'm with Northline Logistics out of Seattle. My CB's dead, but I can put a call through once I get signal, or..." She lifted her head. Her eyes weren't red from crying. They were rimmed with frost, lashes tipped in tiny white spikes like someone had painted them with ice. Her lips moved, but no sound came at first, just a tight, breathless shudder. "You came back," she whispered finally. Her voice sounded like old tape, thin, a little warped, faint hiss underneath. "You finally stopped." Logan glanced at the pickup, suddenly reluctant to look too closely. The windows were frosted over from the inside, patterns of ice spreading outward from a dark shape in the driver's seat. The truck's hood was dusted with snow that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Her gaze flicked to the dashboard of his idling semi where the clock glowed 2:13, then to the mile marker, then back to him. "I don't know," she said. "It's always the same. The road goes. The lights come. And then you drive past." Logan licked his lips. They felt as numb as his fingers. "I just came through here yesterday." She shook her head slowly, almost pityingly. "No. You came through years ago." He laughed, but it came out wrong, too high, too thin. "Look, I'm new. First time on the Alcan. I'd remember." "Do you?" she asked softly. Her question stuck in him like a hook. "Do you?" He tried to remember the first night he'd seen the pickup. The more he pushed at the memory, the more it slid away, like trying to hold on to something underwater. There had been snow. There had been darkness. There had been the ticking dashboard clock and the quiet CB. But had there been a day before that? A truck stop? A way station? A border crossing? His logbook said yes. His logbook had neat digital entries. Seattle Yard, Day 1. Prince George, Day 2. Fort Nelson, Day 3. But when he searched for the actual memories, all he found were long tunnels of road and the vague impression of fluorescent lights. He looked down at his hands. For the first time, he noticed how cracked his knuckles were, how the skin near his nails looked raw, as if from weeks of cold, not just a few days. "Come look," the woman said, and there was something like relief in her voice now. "Maybe if you see, you'll remember." Every survival instinct screamed at him to stay where he was, to get back in the cab, to lock the doors and floor it. But fear had already crawled inside with him hours ago. There was nowhere else for it to go. He stepped closer to the pickup and wiped his glove across the driver's side window. The ice inside didn't melt or smear. It fell away in delicate flakes, as if it had been there for a long, long time. Enough slid off that he could see through. A man sat slumped behind the wheel, head tilted slightly forward, still wearing a high-visibility jacket. The skin of his cheek had a dull, waxy cast beneath the frost that feathered his hairline. His hands were locked around the steering wheel, frozen in place. Logan felt his breath catch. The man's face looked familiar in that uncanny way strangers sometimes do. Broad nose, crooked eyebrow, faint scar along the jaw from a childhood bike accident. The same scar Logan saw every morning in the mirror. The dead man in the driver's seat was him. Not exactly, the hair slightly longer, the jaw rougher with days of unshaven stubble. But it was his face, his jacket, even his Northline ID badge hanging from a lanyard around a stiff, unmoving neck. The badge pressed against the glass when he leaned in, his flashlight catching the name printed there. Logan Price. His legs went weak. For a dizzy second, the snow, the truck, the entire night seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," he whispered. The woman watched him, arms still wrapped around herself. "They said they never found your body," she murmured. "Only the truck, off the road in a snowdrift. They said you must have gotten out, tried to walk. But you didn't. You stayed right here." "I'm right here," Logan said, his voice rising. "I'm talking to you." She shook her head slowly. "You're still trying to get to Anchorage." The CB crackled suddenly in his truck, loud enough to cut through the night. A man's voice, staticky and distant. "Anyone northbound on the Alcan, keep an eye out for a missing rig, Northline Logistics, Seattle to Anchorage run. Driver's name is Logan Price, 23, last contact 5 nights ago near the border. If you see anything." The transmission dissolved back into static. Logan staggered backward, one hand on his chest as if he could steady his racing heart. The air felt thinner, the cold sharper. The miles behind him, all those night hours, seemed to press forward, folding onto themselves like an accordion. "How many times have I driven past you?" he asked. The woman's expression softened. "Enough that I stopped counting. Enough that I started to think you never would." "Never would what?" "Stop." Wind hissed through the trees, carrying tiny grains of snow that stung his cheeks. He became aware of how silent the world was beyond the two vehicles. No distant engines. No planes. No animal sounds. Just his idling truck, the muttering CB, and the small, patient woman who might not be entirely alive herself. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Not from you," she said, stepping closer. For the first time, he saw that her parka wasn't modern. The fabric was faded, the zipper old-fashioned. Her boots looked decades out of style. Frost ringed the edges of her hood like a permanent halo. From the road, he stared at her. "The road? It likes loops," she said, almost apologetically. "Likes to keep things moving. Sometimes, when someone dies wrong, when they're not ready to stop, it finds a way to let them keep going." Her eyes flicked to the dead man in the pickup. "You kept driving long after you were gone. You just never noticed. You drove past me every night at 2:13, over and over, chasing a destination you were never going to reach." Logan felt a strange numbness roll through him, starting in his hands and crawling up his arms. "So what changes if I stopped?" Her smile was small and sad. "Now you know." The truck's engine sputtered. The dashboard lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again as if someone were flicking a switch far away. The clock blinked. 2:13 flickered, dissolved into nonsense characters, then steadied on midnight. Reset. Behind him, the CB crackled one last time. "Call off the search. Weather pushing in, no sign of the truck. We'll log it as undetermined." The voice faded. Logan looked at his rig. The familiar shape seemed thinner somehow, less solid, the headlights not quite touching the snow as strongly as they had before. His footprints between the truck and the pickup were already fading, edges softening as if the night itself were swallowing them. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now?" The woman's gaze lifted toward the dark northern sky, where faint curtains of green light had begun to unfurl, aurora rippling silently above the trees. "Now the road lets you stop, or you keep driving. Your choice." He thought of Anchorage, of a warehouse that would never see his truck backed into Bay 3, of a dispatcher staring at a blinking red lost contact icon on a monitor. He thought of the search parties that had already given up, of his own family back in Spokane waiting for a call that would never come. He also thought of the endless, repeating mile markers, of the night that never seemed to end, of the loop that had held him without him even knowing. He looked at his frozen reflection in the pickup's glass one last time. The dead man looked tired, not scared, just worn out from too many miles. "I think," Logan said quietly, "I've driven enough." The woman nodded as if that were the only right answer. She held out her hand. Her fingers were cold when they closed around his, but not painfully so, more like the chill of fresh snow on warm skin. The sound of his idling engine faded behind him as they walked away from the vehicles, off the shoulder and into the trees. The aurora brightened overhead, shadows stretching and thinning. For a moment he thought he heard his own truck's horn, distant and hollow, echoing down the highway as if someone had leaned on it in surprise. Then there was only wind and snow, and the faint glow of green light. Back on the asphalt, mile marker 0 stood alone. Minutes, or hours or years, later, another truck would pass it at 2:13 a.m. The driver glancing briefly at the empty shoulder, seeing nothing but an old scuff of rubber and a rust-stained patch in the snow. They'd shiver without knowing why, turn up the heater and keep going north. The road would watch patient. And somewhere between British Columbia and the Alaskan border, time would flex, waiting for its next chance to loop. Story 2. The Last Call on Channel 19. Voice in the blizzard. By the time the blizzard swallowed the Dalton, Eli Kincaid had already outlived most of the guys he started with. 31 winters on the haul road had carved permanent lines into his face, bleached his hair, and left his bones aching whenever the temperature dropped below 0, which north of Fairbanks was just about always. He'd seen trucks rolled by crosswinds, tankers frozen solid in -50 temps, and more moose collisions than he cared to count. Storms didn't scare him. Not really. But that night, somewhere between Coldfoot and Deadhorse, when the world beyond his headlights turned into a white, roaring void, Eli finally understood what it meant to feel small. Not just human small. Expendable small. Like if the storm decided to erase him, the Dalton would simply close over the absence and keep going. "Come on, girl," he muttered to the Kenworth, knuckles pale on the wheel. One more run. The wind hammered the side of the trailer so hard the truck shuddered, chains clattering against the ice-glazed asphalt. His headlights bounced off a solid wall of snow, turning the blizzard into an endless tunnel of white. The road's edges vanished. The sky vanished. Up and down, left and right, all blurred into the same suffocating whiteness. He flicked his eyes to the dash. -41 degrees Fahrenheit. CB, Channel 19. Signal weak but there. "Breaker 19, he said, voice steady out of habit. "Northbound out of Coldfoot, name's Eli, anybody else in this mess?" Static answered first, the kind that hissed like sand against glass. Then, faintly, a man's voice. "Copy you, Eli, southbound just cleared Adigan. White as a ghost out there, brother. Keep it slow." Another voice cut in, older, chuckling without humor. "She's a mean one tonight. Dalton's trying to thin the herd." Relief warmed Eli more than the heater. Other trucks on the road meant witnesses. If he went into the ditch, someone would at least know where to tell the troopers to start looking. He adjusted his speed, 30 felt like 70 on glass, and let the tire ruts guide him. Somewhere ahead, the outline of the Brooks Range was just a darker shade of nothing. Then, under the chatter and static, a new voice slid onto the channel. Soft. Female. Wrong. Breaker. Breaker. Anyone northbound near pump station. What? The way she said it, like she had to drag each word through cold, made the hair on Eli's arms stand up. Pump station 5. He knew that name. Every haul road driver did. Eli leaned toward the mic. "You're on 19, sweetheart. Repeat your position?" Another pause. Static scratched the edges of her words. "I'm at the pump station. North side. I can see the road, but nobody stops. I need help. Please." That voice didn't belong up here. The Dalton was damned near all men all the time. Dispatchers, mechanics, troopers, sure plenty of women. But in the cab at -40 in a whiteout at midnight? that was almost always grizzled and bearded and half frozen. Before he could answer, a third voice barged in, sharp and urgent. Negative, negative, Eli, you leave that alone. It was the southbound he'd heard before, closer now, his signal stronger. That you, Torres? Eli asked, frowning. Yeah, it's Torres. Listen, Kincaid, pump 5 is done. They shut it down after the fire, 7 years back? Nothing up there but twisted steel and snow. The older chuckle guy chimed in, humor gone. He ain't kidding. I was on the cleanup crew. Nothing left but ghosts and burnt concrete. Static crackled again. The woman's voice sliced through it, closer, more desperate. Please, whoever you are. I can't feel my feet. I've been calling all night. You're the first one to answer. Just pull in. I can see your lights. Eli squinted through the windshield. All he could see was white. There's nothing to pull into, ma'am, he said, forcing calm into his voice. Pump 5's offline. You sure you got your location right? Silence, and for a heartbeat he thought he'd lost her. Then, I've been here since the fire. Those words sat in his cab like a third presence. Torres swore softly over the radio. There. You hear that, Eli? That don't sound right. Keep your nose pointed north and don't answer again. Some weirdo playing games with a base station. Eli's knee bounced. The guilt crawled in right on cue, as familiar as the Dalton's mile markers. 31 years of wondering if he should have stopped for this car or that rake, if he could have changed some awful headline by pulling over 5 minutes earlier. It's a whiteout, he said into the mic. Nobody sees my lights unless they're right on top of me. The woman whispered, I can see you. The radio popped, squealed, and then all three voices, Torres, the old-timer, the woman, blurred into distortion and cut out. Channel 19 went dead. Only the storm remained, roaring loud enough that Eli could feel it in his teeth. He let out a long breath he didn't remember holding. Probably some bored ham operator in Fairbanks, he muttered. Or some drunk tourist with a handheld. Then the road curved, and through the storm his headlights caught something looming on the right. Steel. Concrete. A sagging chain-link fence half buried in snow. An overhead sign, bent and blackened but still legible beneath the frost. Pump Station 5, no unauthorized access. Eli swore under his breath. The ruins rose out of the white like a shipwreck in a frozen sea. Tanks scorched and caved in on themselves. Burnt support beams jutted up like broken ribs. The main building was a low, collapsed shape suffocating under drifts of wind-hardened snow. Nobody had bothered to plow the entrance. No one had any reason to. Except there, cutting across the otherwise pristine snowbank, were tire tracks. One set. Fresh. They led from the highway shoulder through the torn remains of the gate and down toward the station yard. His heart gave a single, dull thump. The pattern was familiar. The width. The spacing. They matched his rig. Eli pulled to a crawl, blinkers clicking, eyes flicking from the wheel ruts beside him to the dim shapes of the station beyond. He hadn't turned in. He knew he hadn't. Breaker 19, Torres, you still with me? He said, thumb tight on the mic button. Nothing. Southbound out of Adigan, this is Eli Kincaid, northbound near the old Pump 5. Anybody got ears? Only static answered, riding the blizzard's howl. A cold that had nothing to do with the temperature slid down his spine. The storm isolated you, that was textbook Dalton. But the radio was his lifeline. He'd never heard it go this flat, this empty. You should keep going. That was the smart move. The veteran move. Over the years, he'd called rescue for enough wrecks and fire scenes to know that the first rule was, don't make yourself victim number 2. The tracks in the snow glowed back at him, accusing. He thought of the voice. I've been here since the fire. Maybe some worker's daughter who'd gotten stranded. Maybe some crazy survivalist. Maybe a drunk. Whatever she was still a human being in -40 hell. And if he drove on and heard later that someone had frozen to death out here, and he'd been close enough to help, the guilt would kill him long before the Dalton did. Damn it, he groaned. He downshifted, eased the wheel to the right, and followed the tracks through the mangled fence. Snow peeled away under his bumper in heavy curls. The truck lurched and creaked, chains scraping against buried debris. The pump station swallowed his rig. Wind didn't slacken. If anything, it sounded worse, swirling between the skeletal structures, whining through busted vents. His headlights bounced off rusted tanks, frozen fire-scarred signage, and graffiti half-hidden by frost. The tire tracks wound into the heart of the yard and stopped near what had once been the main building. There, the snow piled higher than his hood. The tracks disappeared into it like something had simply driven straight into a wall and been absorbed. The voice came back as he hit the brakes. Thank you for stopping. It wasn't coming from the CB speaker this time. It was inside his cab, close as a whisper at his ear, though the radio panel remained dark. Eli's hand jerked off the mic. His breath fogged the windshield in ragged bursts. "Where are you?" he asked, keeping his tone as flat as he could. "Out here." The words seemed to drift from the yard, from the snow itself. "You came further than most." He stared through the glass. All he saw was the echo of his headlights on white, fading in and out as the wind shifted. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "In and out. Fast. You've been stuck out in worse, Kincaid." He forced himself into his heavy parka, pulled on his balaclava, headlamp, goggles. The ritual of suiting up helped. Layers between him and the impossible. When he cracked the door open, the storm punched into him full force. Ice shards in his nose, lungs, ears. Sound turned thin and far away, like he'd stepped underwater. He clambered down, boots sinking nearly to the ankle. His headlamp cut a small, wavering circle through the blowing snow. The front wall of the main building lay half collapsed, black streaks from old smoke still visible where the snow hadn't crusted over. Windows were blown out. Door frames charred to stubs. "Keep talking," he shouted into the void. "I can't see you." The answer came from his left, and his right, and behind him. "I'm here. I'm here. I'm here." Same voice, different directions. It skittered over the yard like a reflection in shattered glass, always at the edge of his hearing. "This is stupid," Eli muttered. "World's dumbest ghost hunt." He followed the tire tracks until they vanished under that final swell of drifted snow. The drift was oddly smooth, almost sculpted, as if something lay beneath it. The shape, truck-sized. "You see it now?" the voice asked, close enough that he spun around. Nobody stood behind him. But there, just at the line where his headlamp's weak glow gave way to darkness, he could make out forms. 3? No, for figures in parkas, hoods up, standing between the old tanks. Not moving. Not quite solid. Their outlines blurred in the blowing snow, edges fraying and knitting back together like smoke. "Torres," Eli called, a little wildly. "That you, old man?" One of the figures lifted a gloved hand in a lazy half-wave, a gesture Eli recognized from 1,000 passing trucks. "About time you joined us, brother," a familiar voice rolled across the yard. Torres's voice. But it didn't come from a radio. It came from the thing wearing his shape. The woman's voice threaded through his again. "They all heard me. Eventually. Just like you." The storm dropped in pitch for an instant, the howl dipping low enough that Eli's ears popped. Beneath it, he thought he heard something else, the faint, overlapping murmur of CB chatter. Dozens of voices, layered like old recordings, played all at once. "Breaker, anyone copy? Pump 5, can't get out. Wide out, turned off at the sign. I think something's wrong with my clock. Help me, please. I can't feel my hands." Ghosts, he thought. Not of people. Of calls. He looked back at the buried shape in front of him. Snow crusted in coils along its sides, hiding the details, but he didn't need to see the logo to recognize the silhouette. A Kenworth. Same sleeper height. Same bumper. Same tank configuration. Same as his. The wind shifted and pushed an eddy of snow off the drift. Just enough to reveal the last few letters stamped into the trailer's side. Kincaid Logistics. Eli's stomach turned to ice. That's my truck," he croaked. "You've been here since the fire too," the woman said gently. "You just kept driving." "No," he rasped. "I'm out on the road, northbound out of Coldfoot, talking to you. My truck's up there." He jabbed a gloved finger toward the highway he couldn't see anymore. "I can go back to it right now." "Can you?" He turned. The path back to his rig was just blank. A churning curtain of white. No footprints. No headlight glow. No hulking outline waiting faithfully where he'd left it. His headlamp beam vanished 20 feet out. Beyond that might as well have been the moon. The figures by the tanks stood silent and patient, like men leaning on bumpers at a truck stop, waiting for a bay to open up. "You answer the call," Torres said, his voice tinged with dry amusement. "That's all it takes. She just needs one more driver on the line so she can log off." "I don't," Eli swallowed. His tongue felt thick. "I don't understand." The woman's voice was suddenly right beside him, warm breath he couldn't feel ghosting past his ear. "I didn't want to die alone," she said. "The night of the fire I kept calling and calling. Nobody came before the flames did. The last thing I heard on Channel 19 was a driver saying, 'Sorry, can't stop, gotta keep schedule.'" Guilt flared hot. Eli couldn't remember saying those words, but he could have. God knew he'd said similar enough times. Storm or not, load still had to move. "The road holds on to what it likes," she continued. Voices. Regrets. Loops. The pump station's dead, but the channel isn't. It keeps ringing. Someone has to answer. He remembered every time his finger had hovered over the mic, debating whether to respond to a broken, static-ridden call. Every time he told himself, someone closer will help. Every time he kept driving. The figures took a few steps forward. Their boots didn't leave impressions. You can go back to the cab, Torres said. Take the wheel. Drive on into the white. Hear the calls. Try to warn the next guy. Just like we do. And if I don't? Eli asked. Then I keep talking, the woman said, and there was infinite tiredness in her voice now. Begging. Crying. Year after year. Storm after storm. Until someone else stops and takes my place. You've been hearing me for a long time, Eli. You just finally answered tonight. The storm roared around them, indifferent. Above it, faint and fragile, Aurora shimmered through the clouds like green veins. Time inched forward or looped back or maybe just held its breath. Eli looked down at his hands. He couldn't feel them anymore. Hadn't he realized since he'd stepped out of the cab? His breath no longer fogged the air. Maybe he'd gone into the ditch in that first wide-out gust an hour ago. Maybe none of this was happening the way his mind was trying to tell the story. Maybe he'd been a voice on Channel 19 for longer than he knew. He thought of all the younger drivers he'd lectured about caution, about not chasing heroics in a storm, about how the Dalton didn't care how tough you were. If he stepped into that buried truck, if he took the phantom wheel, he knew instinctively what would happen. He'd feel the comforting rumble beneath him, see the faint glow of the dash, hear the CB crackle back to life. Breaker 19 northbound near Pump 5. Anybody in this mess? He would become the reassurance on the line, the old hand saying, keep it slow, brother, watch that corner, don't let the Dalton take you. A loop inside a loop. And somewhere, a woman's voice would finally go quiet. He let out a long breath he couldn't see. All right, Eli Kincaid said. I've been running this road my whole life. Might as well keep dispatching from the other side. The woman laughed softly. It was a sound without weight, without breath, pure relief. Thank you, she said. The figures around him faded, their edges unraveling into the storm, leaving only the shape of the buried truck and the impression of a door handle exactly where his hand expected it to be. When he grasped it, it was neither metal nor ice. It was memory given form. The blizzard's roar narrowed to the familiar hum of an engine as he climbed into a cab that wasn't there, sat in a seat that fit him like it always had, and reached for a mic that crackled alive in his palm. Breaker 19, he said, voice steady as ever. Northbound near Pump Station 5. Name's Eli. Anybody else in this mess? Far away, through layers of static and years, a younger driver flinched at the unexpected comfort in his speaker. And out in the ruins, under the buried tanks and concrete, the last echo of a woman's crying finally faded into true, blessed silence. Channel 19 rolled on. The Dalton kept its secrets. And the next storm was already building on the horizon. Story 3, Hitchhiker at the Ice Bridge. The passenger who knows too much. By the time Ray Mercer saw the boy, he was already halfway past him. It was one of those Yukon nights where the dark felt heavy, like something you could scrape off the windshield with your fingernails. The road ahead was a narrow ribbon of half-frozen asphalt framed by snowbanks and black spruce. His headlights carved a tunnel through the falling flakes, and there, for just a heartbeat, the beam caught bare skin. Bare feet. Ray's hands moved before his brain did. He hit the brakes, the chains on his tires clattering, trailer swaying just enough to make his stomach tighten. The rig rumbled to a stop 50 yards down the road. The clock on the dash read 1:47 a.m. Temperature, minus 29 degrees Celsius. Nearest town, too damned far. He checked his mirrors, saw nothing but white and dark. For a moment he wondered if he'd imagined it, a trick of the snow, a shadow that looked like a person because his brain was tired and desperate for something human. Then he saw a figure in his side mirror, walking, slowly but steadily through the snow in the truck's wake toward the passenger's side. Ray swore under his breath. This was the kind of thing you told yourself you'd never do, pick up a stranger in the middle of nowhere at night. But no one barefoot survived long at that temperature. It wasn't a choice. Not really. He leaned over and popped the passenger door, letting a knife of freezing air slice into the cab. Get in, he shouted. Move. The boy hauled himself up into the seat with a surprising lack of clumsiness. No coat, no hat, no gloves. Just a thin hoodie, jeans soaked to the knee, and those bare red raw feet. His hair was dark and shaggy, plastered to his forehead with meltwater. He shut the door and suddenly the cab felt very small. Up close Ray could see the kid's face. 16, maybe 17. Cheeks flushed from the cold, but his eyes were clear. Too clear. No confusion, no babbling, no shivering so hard he couldn't speak. Just a calm, almost curious gaze taking everything in. "Christ, kid," Ray muttered, cranking the heater up another notch. "You trying to die out there?" The boy shrugged, eyes flicking over the dashboard. They lingered on the photo taped above the GPS. A faded picture of a woman and a little boy on a lakeshore, both squinting at the sun, both laughing. "I missed my ride north," the kid said. His voice was quiet but not weak. "Figured you could use the company." There was something about how he said it that made the hairs on the back of Ray's neck rise. "Nobody misses a ride out here," Ray said. "Not barefoot at 2 in the damn morning, you don't. Where'd you come from?" The boy looked at him, and the cab suddenly felt a few degrees colder. "You passed the pullout about 10 kilometers back," he said. "The blue Suburban with the busted taillight? You noticed it, but you didn't stop." Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. He had noticed that Suburban. Nose in toward the trees, engine off, no lights. Part of him had thought about stopping, checking on whoever was inside. The bigger part, tired, late, and carrying a load that was already behind schedule, had told him someone else would handle it. He hadn't seen anyone standing on the road. Definitely hadn't seen a barefoot teenager. "You got a good imagination," he said carefully. The boy just smiled faintly and leaned back, letting the heater blow over his wet feet. "You're late," he said. "Dispatch expected you at the White Horse Yard by 11 p.m. You didn't call in because you didn't want to hear Benson ripping into you again. You told yourself you'd make up the time north of Haines Junction." Ray swallowed. "I didn't say where I was headed," he said. "You didn't have to." The kid angled his head, studying him. "You always tell yourself that every time you're behind. I'll make it up later." The way he mimicked Ray's internal voice made something twist in his chest. "Who the hell are you?" Ray asked. The boy ignored the question. His gaze drifted around the cab, pausing again on the picture above the GPS. His eyes softened in a way that made Ray's throat tighten. "You still keep that one up," he said quietly. "Even after the divorce. Even after she told you to let it go." Ray felt as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. "My ex-wife lives in Alberta," he said slowly. "She doesn't know what I keep in my truck." "Sure she does," the boy said. "She was there when the RCMP boxed it up with your things. When they gave her your wallet in a plastic bag. That made no sense. None of this made sense. But the kid had said it like he was remembering, not guessing. Ray forced a laugh that sounded too thin to be convincing. "You on something, kid? Because this is one weird." Ray. His name, sharp and precise, cut him off. The boy's eyes were fixed on him now. Not hostile. Not accusing. Just knowing. "You don't have time to fight the strange tonight," he said. "You're coming up on the bridge." Then the GPS chimed, its synthetic voice flat under the rumble of the engine. "Recalculating. Turn left in 800 meters. Road closed ahead. Temporary crossing available." Ray frowned. There shouldn't be any left turn. The Yukon or Alaska route this time of year was straightforward. Follow the main highway, cross the river at the permanent bridge before the border, keep rolling. Temporary crossings were a late winter thing, when the ice was thick enough to drive on but before the melt. Late March was too far gone. The official ice bridges were shut down weeks ago. He glanced at the map. A new purple line had appeared, faint but clear. A short detour off the main road, looping down to the river and back up, labeled, "Temporary Ice Bridge, North Crossing." "I didn't see that earlier," he muttered. The boy nodded. "You weren't looking. You were busy telling yourself you'd make up the time." There it was again, that perfect echo of Ray's own excuses. A sign loomed out of the snow on the right, reflective letters glowing in his headlights. "Road closed ahead. Local traffic only, use temporary crossing." Someone had stapled a newer paper notice beneath it, half peeled by wind and ice. He couldn't read it at speed, but he caught enough. "Bridge damage. Delays." The GPS chimed again. "Turn left in 200 meters." Ray's hands moved almost automatically, slowing the truck, peering through the snow for the junction. He saw it, a narrow plowed cut leading off toward the invisible river. Fresh tire ruts. Reflective stakes marking the edge. "If we take that, we'll shave 40 minutes, the boy said lightly. "If you stay on the main road, you'll hit the closure and sit for hours." It was exactly what Ray had been thinking and hating himself for thinking. The weight in his trailer seemed to press harder against the fifth wheel. He thought of what he was hauling. Not just building supplies. Not just pallets of generic freight. He thought of the unmarked crate bolted toward the front. The one Benson had told him, off the record, to keep locked and unquestioned. The one that was supposed to be on the Alaskan side before dawn, no delays, no inspections. A secret riding on ice. You don't even know what I'm carrying, Ray said. The boy's lips quirked. Hazmat, he said. Technically. Mostly solvents and paints, with just enough extra in that front crate to make the paperwork complicated. You'll get triple pay for not asking questions. You told yourself it's not your problem as long as it stays in the trailer. The knot in Ray's gut, the one he'd been ignoring since Seattle, tightened. Buckle up, he snapped, more sharply than he meant to, and downshifted. The truck turned onto the side road. Instantly the sound changed. The relative smoothness of asphalt gave way to the crunch and groan of packed snow over ice. The chains bit, rattling. The snowbanks on either side rose higher, closer, pressing in. The boy clicked his seatbelt without being told, eyes on the windshield. You've done this before, he said. Everybody who's run this route long enough has done ice crossings, Ray replied. Not this late. Not anymore, the boy agreed. You used to. Before. Before what? Ray asked. The boy didn't answer. The road sloped down, visibility shrinking as they dipped below the tree line. For a moment, snow and shadow swallowed them completely. Then they broke into an open stretch and the world opened up below, flat, white, and shifting faintly. The river. A wide band of ice, humped and layered from months of freezing and refreezing, carved by plows into a makeshift roadway. Reflective poles stuck up at intervals, marking the safe path. On the far side, dim through the snow, Ray could see the ramp up to the opposite bank. Doesn't look that bad, he said, mostly to convince himself. The boy watched the ice. It didn't last time either. Ray's grip tightened. What last time? The boy tilted his head, studying the far bank. Right about now you'd be checking the clock, he said, calculating if you can still make it to the border before the storm hits full. Deciding not to slow down. You tell yourself you've driven worse in Alberta, that these crossings are built thick. You wouldn't think about the trailer weight, or the extra crate, or the way the temperature's been bouncing around all week. He turned to Ray. His eyes looked older than his face. You never think about how quick ice can let go until it does. Ray's heart stumbled in his chest. A memory tugged at the edge of his mind, water, black and sudden, where white should be. A sensation of falling, weightless and impossibly heavy at the same time. A scream. He couldn't remember anyone screaming. He put the truck in first gear, eased it onto the ice. The whole rig vibrated, low, bone deep, like a living thing. The sound was different here. No more hum of tires. Just the creak and crackle of frozen river under 40 tons of steel. Go slow, the boy said softly. This is where it always starts. Always. Ray repeated, voice rough. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontally, erasing the sky. It felt like the world ended just beyond the reach of his headlights. He could only see 2 marker poles ahead at a time. How do you know so much? Ray asked. About me. About this road. The boy's fingers traced absently along the seam of the dashboard, like someone running their hand over something they'd built. I've been here before, he said. With you. A sharp ache stabbed behind Ray's eyes. His vision swam for a second, not from the snow but from something twisting in his brain. When? The boy smiled, sad and small. You don't remember the crash, he said. That's the only way this works. The word crash hit him like cold water. Suddenly, fragments, headlights not from his truck but from something coming the other way too fast. A child's laughter in the back seat. His wife's hand on his arm saying slow down, Ray, the ice. The sensation of the road dropping away. Except that had been years ago. Another life. Another man. A different road. Hadn't it? He'd filed it under stress and nightmares. The kind you got after too many dangerous miles. The kind you didn't talk about because truckers didn't talk about that stuff. You're mixing me up with someone else, he said hoarsely. No, the boy said gently. You're mixing yourself up with someone else. With the man you became after you didn't make it across. The ice groaned under them, the sound like distant thunder. You died here, the boy continued quietly. You and Mom. The SUV never saw you coming on the crossing. You were going too fast, they were going too fast, the ice cracked, everybody went in. They called it a freak accident. They said the bridge should have been closed. They said it was no one's fault. He looked at Ray, really looked at him. But you always thought it was yours. Ray's chest felt tight, not from the cold. His knuckles were bloodless on the wheel. I'm a trucker, he said as if saying it could anchor him. I've been hauling north for 15 years. In this version, the boy said. In the one where they pulled you out of the water. Ray pulled in a ragged breath. He smelled diesel, cold, a faint hint of peppermint from the air freshener dangling above them. Ordinary details. Real details. "Why are we here?" he whispered. "Because it keeps trying to happen again," the boy said. "Because you keep making the same choices. Because the road remembers." Something ahead flickered in the snow. Movement, headlights, a reflection. Far down the ice, barely visible, another pair of lights appeared, bobbing slightly as they crawled toward the crossing from the far bank. "Local traffic only," the boy murmured. "That's what the sign says, right? They changed it after. They try to keep people off. But you always find a reason to hurry." His voice was calm, but his hands were trembling now. "Every time we hit the center at the same moment as them. Every time the ice breaks. Every time we don't make it. And every time someone tries to fix it." Ray's ears rang. The other vehicle's lights grew slowly brighter through the swirl. It looked like a dark SUV or pickup, vague and small but coming straight down the marked path. "We," Ray echoed. The boy's throat bobbed. "In the first timeline I was in the back seat," he said. "You were driving. We were going to Alaska for a new start. You promised Mom this haul would fix everything." He swallowed. "I didn't make it out of the water." The words sat heavy between them. Ray's heart stuttered. He looked at the boy's face and for the first time, noticed what had been nagging him since the kid climbed into the cab. Something about the angle of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the way his left eyebrow arched higher than the right when he was concentrating. It was there in the faded photo above the GPS. The laughing little boy on the lake shore. Older now. Stretched out, thinned, but undeniably the same child. "No," Ray whispered. "Yes," the boy said. There were tears in his eyes now, shining in the dim cab light. "I missed my ride north. That's what I told you, remember?" He gave a crooked smile that broke something in Ray's chest. "I've been trying to catch up ever since." The ice boomed under them, one long, shuddering crack that rattled the truck from bumper to bumper. The other vehicle's headlights flared in the snow, close enough now that Ray could see the outline. A dark SUV roof box on top, a familiar dent in the rear quarter panel. The same dent he remembered putting there with a badly swung hockey stick in a life that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. "What am I supposed to do?" Ray's voice cracked. "Turn back? Floor it? What fixes this?" "For once," the boy said, voice barely audible over the groaning ice, "you slow down enough to stop." Ray's body screamed against it. Every instinct honed by schedules and deadlines and dispatchers pressed him to keep going, to push, to gun the engine and clear the danger as fast as possible. But his son's eyes, because that's who he was, there was no denying it now, held him like a hand on his shoulder. He eased off the throttle, downshifted, let the truck roll to a crawl. Then, heart hammering, tapped the brakes until the huge rig came to a full, grinding stop. The ice sang under the sudden weight, a mournful, rising tone, but it held. The SUV ahead slowed, too uncertain, its lights wavering. "Come on," the boy whispered. "Come on, Dad. Figure it out." The word Dad sliced through Ray like a blade and stitched something back together at the same time. He grabbed the CB mic with a shaking hand, switched to emergency and keyed it. "Vehicle on the north ice crossing," he said, voice shaking but loud. "This is a northbound semi at midspan. Ice is unstable. Do not enter. Repeat, do not enter. Back off and wait it out." For a second, nothing. Then a crackly, startled voice came back. 10-4 semi. "Will we see you? We'll hold at the bank. You sure you're okay out there?" "No," Ray thought. "No, I'm not. Just don't come out," he said. "Not yet." The SUV stopped at the edge of the ice, its lights fixed on him. After a long moment, it began slowly reversing, backing away from the river. The ice groaned again, sharply, like something protesting a missed meal. A fissure shot out along the surface to Ray's left, a dark vein that spidered across the crossing and slithered past the front bumper. If he'd been going faster, if they'd both been at the center. He didn't finish the thought. The boy exhaled a shaky breath, fogging the inside of the windshield. "That's new," he said. "What happens now?" Ray asked. The kid's shoulders slumped a little, tension draining away. "Now you inch forward," he said. "Light as you can. You make it to the far bank. They close this bridge for good in the morning. They call it a near miss instead of a tragedy. And you keep going. Do you?" Ray asked. The boy smiled, and it was exactly the smile from the photo. Crooked, bright, full of more forgiveness than Ray deserved. "I don't have to," he said. "I got what I came for." The truck lurched as Ray eased it forward, each meter feeling like it stretched into years. The ice complained, but it didn't break. Slowly, inch by inch, the far ramp crept closer until finally, with a jolt that felt like a heartbeat restarting, the front wheels hit solid, snow-packed earth. Once the trailer cleared the river and the last chain rattled up onto land, Ray let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He turned to the passenger seat. The boy was gone. No damp footprints on the floor mat. No stray drops of melted snow. Just an empty seat and the lingering echo of peppermint and cold air. Above the GPS, the photo fluttered slightly in a draft that shouldn't have existed. For a moment, in the flicker of the dash lights, it seemed clearer than it had in years. The woman's arm around the smaller boy, the sun shining on their faces, and behind the camera, someone laughing. Ray reached up and pressed a finger against the image. His hand was shaking. "Thanks for the ride, kid," he whispered. "Sorry I was late." The radio crackled softly, like distant laughter. Then the highway stretched out ahead, dark and cold and waiting. For the first time in a very long time, Ray checked the clock, and didn't care what it said. He put the truck in gear and drove north, leaving behind a river that would never quite claim him the same way again, and a closed ice bridge that, if anyone ever asked, no one could quite agree had still been open that late in the season. Somewhere between Yukon and Alaska, a barefoot hitchhiker finally made his ride north. And somewhere in the unseen places where roads and regrets tangled together, a loop quietly snapped and did not form again. Story 4, Rest Stop 47. Never park alone. By the time Jonah saw the sign, he was sure he'd already passed it. The GPS said there was nothing for another 30 miles. No marked pullouts, no fuel, no services. Just a long black ribbon of highway through the winter dark between Talk and the road to Anchorage. Snow hammered the windshield in frantic diagonals, and the world beyond his headlights was just a swirling white tunnel. He was almost out of legal drive time. His eyes burned. The wind shoved at his rig in heavy, icy gusts that made every curve feel like a dare. He'd been telling himself for the last hour that he'd push to the next official rest area, that he'd white-knuckle it just a little longer, that he'd make it up later, the lie every trucker told themselves when the schedule was tight and the weather was bad and the dispatcher's voice still rang in their ears. Then the sign appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the snow like a hallucination. Rest area, 2 kilometers, 47. Just that. White reflective letters on blue sheet metal. No next rest area, no services listed. Just a number and the promise of somewhere he could stop. Jonah blinked, leaned forward, wiped the inside of the glass with his sleeve. "That's not on the route," he muttered. He knew this stretch. Not like a local, but enough to have the mileage out here memorized. He'd never seen Rest Area 47 on any map, any DOT list, any chatter from other drivers. His GPS stayed mute, stubbornly showing nothing but highway ahead. No icon, no turnoff, nothing. Outside, the snow thickened, turning from fast streaks to a near-solid wall. The wind howled around the cab like a living thing. The truck shuddered again. The trailer wiggled just enough to make his throat go dry. He could keep going. Or he could take the exit that shouldn't exist. When the second sign flashed by. Rest area, 500m, 47, exit right. He was already reaching for the turn signal. "Okay," he told the empty cab. "Okay. Just for a few hours." He eased onto the off-ramp, tires crunching through fresh snow that somehow had no tire tracks. The ramp curved gently down, flanked by unbroken forest. Then, as if someone had drawn it onto the dark with a ruler, the rest area appeared. It looked perfect. A wide, freshly plowed lot with clearly marked truck lanes. Lights that weren't the usual dim yellow sodium arcs but clean, bright LED, casting everything in a soft, even glow. A low building of dark timber and glass with warm light spilling from the windows. And trucks. At least a dozen of them, parked in neat rows facing the building. Big names and independents, old rigs and newer models. Their cabs glowed faintly inside, like someone was home in each one. Jonah felt tension slide off his shoulders, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. "Guess this is my lucky night," he said, and guided his rig into an open spot at the end of the line. He set the brakes, killed the engine, and for a moment just sat there, listening to the ticking of cooling metal and the muffled roar of the storm outside. The quiet felt thick, padded. Zit. The warmth hit him the moment he stepped into the building. He'd expected the usual, harsh lights, buzzing vending machines, a tired bulletin board with curling posters about chains and moose crossing. Instead, Rest Stop 47 looked like someone had taken a high-end lodge and stripped out the tourists. Wood paneling. A stone fireplace at one end, real flames crackling. Soft armchairs clustered in little groups. A vending section, sure, but fully stocked and spotless. Restrooms marked with clean, clear signs. A long, sturdy table lined with coffee urns, all steaming, labeled in neat handwriting. Regular. Decaf. Dark roast. Cocoa. And people. Every chair was occupied. Mostly truckers by the look. Heavy boots, worn jackets, caps with company logos. A couple of folks in winter coats that could be locals or snowplow crews. Every one of them looked up when he walked in. The conversation, the low murmur he hadn't consciously noticed before, stuttered and fell quiet. For a heartbeat, Jonah felt like he'd walked into a bar in a town too small for strangers. Then a man near the coffee table grinned. "Well, hell," he said, standing. "You made it." He was in his 50s maybe, with a beard gone mostly gray and a weathered Carhartt jacket. His cap read Portage Freight. "You sounded rough on the radio," the man added, crossing the room with his hand out. "Figured you'd end up in a ditch before you found us." I didn't call on the radio," Jonah said automatically, taking the offered hand on reflex. It was warm, solid. "Name's Jonah. Anchorage Run." "Dale," the man said. "Hauling fuel for 30 years. Dumped my last rig outside Fairbanks 6 winters ago. Coffee?" He moved toward the urns without waiting for an answer. Jonah stared at his back. "Dumped my last rig 6 winters ago." People talked like that sometimes about the last wreck, exaggeration to make a story land. He told himself that's all it was as he followed. The coffee was hot and surprisingly good. Not rest area mud, but something with actual flavor. Jonah wrapped his hands around the paper cup and let feelings seep back into his fingers. "You pick a good night to get spooked," Dale said. "Blizzards tossing trucks like toys up there." "Yeah," Jonah asked. A woman seated by the fireplace spoke up, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun under a knit cap. Her jacket had a patch half torn off that once said Alta Northern Logistics. "Semi-jackknifed at kilometer 231 an hour ago," she said. "2 four-wheelers went into the ditch trying to miss him. You'd have hit that in this whiteout for sure." "How'd you know that?" Jonah asked, unsettled. "There's no reception out there. My CB's been static since talk." The woman's lips twitched. "We get good reception here," she said. "Storm will chew at the antennas for a while, but it always comes back." A younger guy near the window snorted. "You sound like a brochure, Maria?" She shrugged. "He should know he got lucky." Jonah glanced around. Everyone was watching him. Not in a hungry way, not exactly, but with a sharp attentiveness that made the hairs on his neck rise. "Sit," Dale said, nodding toward an empty seat near the fire. "You're white as the snow, kid. Ride it out here. Storm's got teeth tonight." Jonah hesitated. His logbook, the digital one built into the dash, had flashed red 10 minutes before he pulled in, warning him he was about to blow through his hours. "Just a few hours," he said. "Long enough for the plows to clear ahead." "Sure," Dale said easily. "Few hours. We're not going anywhere." A few people chuckled at that. The sound was off, not mean. Just a shade too synchronized, like they'd all heard the same punchline a few times too many. Jonah sat. The chair was more comfortable than anything he owned. Warmth from the fire seeped into his boots. He realized distantly that he wasn't really hearing the storm anymore. The wind that had howled around his cab felt distant here, like someone had muted the world. "You find this place on a map?" the younger guy by the window asked. He looked mid-20s with a neat beard and a hoodie that said Eagle River Haulers. "No," Jonah said. "Sign just showed up." "Yeah," the guy said softly. "That's how it happens." Maria shot him a look. He shut up. Jonah shifted in his seat. A prickle of unease slid down his spine. "What is this place?" he asked. "A rest stop," Dale said. "You look around and see something different?" "Actually, yes." Jonah's gaze snagged on the details. No scuffs on the floor. No tracked in slush drying in dirty arcs. No smell of bleach, no hum of ancient hand dryers. Everything looked new, untouched, except there were people everywhere. "Storm will eat you alive out there," an older woman by the far wall said suddenly. She was knitting something, her hands moving with automatic precision. "Best stay a while. At least till sunrise." "When's sunrise?" Jonah asked. She paused. Her needle stuttered just once. "Soon," she said. No one had glanced at a phone. No one wore a watch. "You said you dumped your rig?" Jonah asked Dale quietly. 6 winters ago." Dale's face went still for a heartbeat. Then he shrugged. "Black ice outside Fairbanks," he said. "Jersey barriers, nowhere to go. Tanker rolled. Woke up here." He said it like describing getting rerouted by a traffic jam. "Woke up here," Jonah repeated. Maria sighed. You could ease him into it, you know. He drove through that storm to get here, Dale said. He can handle the short version. People shifted in their seats. The air felt thicker now, charged. Short version of what? Jonah asked. Dale looked at him with something like pity. Rest stop 47, he said, is for drivers who didn't listen. Jonah's cup felt suddenly too hot in his hands. Didn't listen to a what? Forecast. Closures. That little voice that says, pull over, Maria said. Whatever warning you ignore the last time you put your hands on the wheel. The younger guy at the window added quietly, it shows up when you're one bad decision away from joining us. Joining you, Jonah said slowly. No one's truck shows on your dash cam, right? The kid asked. Jonah's heart stumbled. How did you? Go check, the kid said. We'll be here. The invitation did not feel optional. Jonah stood. His legs felt heavy, like he'd been sitting for hours instead of minutes. He walked back out into the cold. Except, it didn't feel that cold. Snow still lashed across the lot, but the wind's bite was duller, as if the worst of it was happening a layer away from him. He climbed into his cab, shut the door, and thumbed on the dashcam display. The live feed showed his truck, parked at the end of a pristine, plowed row. Beyond that, emptiness. White lines marking truck bays. A couple of lonely light poles. No other rigs. He swallowed hard and rewound the footage. 20 minutes. 30. An hour. It was just his truck. Pulling in. Parking. Engines off. Snow blowing. Not a single headlight in the mirrors. He stared at the screen until his reflection swam in it. When he went back inside, no one looked surprised. You see us? Dale asked. Jonah shook his head. Yeah, Dale said. That's how it goes. Am I? Jonah couldn't force the word out. Dead? Maria supplied. Not yet. For now you're standing in the door, the older knitter said. Got 1 foot on the road, 1 foot here. Storm's worse than you think it is. So's your luck. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. What are you? Jonah whispered. Dale's smile was tired. Truckers, he said. Same as you. Just on a different side of the way station now. We all ate it along that same stretch you just came through, the kid near the window said. Black ice, whiteout, avalanches, idiots in pickups, you name it. Some of us had families calling on repeat. Some of us had dispatch barking in our ear. Some of us were just stubborn. All of us ignored something, Maria said. Jonah's heart thumped hollowly in his chest. Then why am I here? Because you're about to, Dale said simply. Rest stop 47 catches the ones who are close enough to taste it. You pull in, you sit down, and we get a chance to talk you into staying put. Staying here, Jonah said. With you. Warm. See? No more storms, no more deadlines, no more dispatch, the knitter said. Coffee's always hot. No one dies on the way to the bathroom. You just rest. It sounded so good that for a second his bones ached with wanting it. No more 12-hour crawls in ice. No more wondering if the patch of fog ahead hit a moose or a minivan. No more doing math on hours of service in his head at 3 in the morning. Downside? He asked hoarsely. Maria's eyes softened. You're done, she said. For the world out there, anyway. Your body's just another statistic on the 6 o'clock. Closed casket if they can't get to you until spring. We're not ghosts, Dale said. Not the way people think. Limbo's a better word. You park here, you never roll again. And if I leave? Jonah asked. The room went very quiet. The storm seemed suddenly louder again, clawing faintly at the walls. Then you go back out into the exact same storm that killed all of us, the kid at the window said softly. Same conditions, same stretch, same blind curves and black ice. Only difference is you know how we screwed up. And you still might die, Maria added. Knowing isn't the same as being spared. Dale spread his hands. Welcome to your choices. Jonah's mind spun. If he stayed, he was safe, but not living. If he left, he might die ugly in a drift or under his own trailer, but he might also make it through. Back to Anchorage. Back to his sister's kids who still thought Uncle Jonah was some kind of highway cowboy. Back to debts and aches and dispatch, sure, but alive. And the truth was, as bone deep as his fear ran, an equally deep part of him rebelled at the thought of spending eternity in a rest stop lobby, no matter how clean the bathrooms were. Why are you so eager for me to stay? He asked, voice low. If you're really trying to help, why not tell me to take my chances? Silence dropped like a curtain. The knitting needles stopped. The kid at the window looked away. Dale sighed. Because when you leave, it hurts, he said quietly. Every time someone walks back out, it drags at us, like being hooked up to them. We feel it when the road hits them. When they don't make it, it's like dying again. And when they do make it? Jonah asked. Maria's mouth twisted. Then we get to sit here knowing we didn't, she said. Knowing the warning signs were there and we still blew through them. Knowing somebody else managed not to be as stupid as we were. There it was. The raw edge under all their calm. Fear, yes, but also envy. Shame. A heavy, clinging self-loathing that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with their own last choices. We're not saints, Jonah, the knitter said softly. We're tired. We're scared. And we're selfish enough to want one more person to stay and make it feel less pointless. Jonah set his empty cup down. His hand didn't shake as much as he expected. Then I appreciate the honesty, he said. He stood. The room seemed to lean toward him, subtle as gravity. You sure? Dale asked. You felt that road, kid? You know what's out there? Yeah, Jonah said. I do. He thought of his mother's voice on the phone a week ago, telling him to be careful. He thought of the way his heart still jumped a little when he saw the northern lights above the road. He thought of every tired, stupid, exhausted choice he'd made and gotten away with. If this was really the line between living and not, he wasn't ready to step over it. Not without a fight. What killed you? He asked Dale. Took the curve on 231 too fast, Dale said. Didn't believe the black ice was that bad. Trailer pushed me sideways into the barrier. Tanker went over. Maria? Wide out, she said. Thought I could follow a set of tail lights. They weren't on the road anymore. The kid at the window swallowed. Avalanche, he said. Saw the warning sign, figured it was old. Parked under a cut bank to take a nap. The older woman lifted her eyes. Pulled into a plow turnout to chain up, she said. Didn't see the drunk pickup coming up behind me. He listened. Memorized. Built a map in his head. Where not to stop, where not to follow, where to crawl instead of run. Thank you, he said. Then he turned toward the door. Good luck, someone murmured. It sounded almost like a prayer. He stepped outside. The storm hit him like a wall. The strange padding, the muffled edges, gone. Wind knifed through his jacket. Snow clawed at his eyes. For a moment his resolve wavered, and he could feel the warm glow behind him like a hand tugging at the back of his collar. He forced himself up into the cab, fingers clumsy on the door handle. The truck's interior was colder than it had any right to be, like it had been sitting alone in this lot for hours. He checked the dash. The clock read the same time it had when he pulled in. His logbook blinked its warning patiently as if no time had passed. On the rear monitor the lot was empty. No other trucks. No building light visible. Just the vague shape of a low structure half lost in blowing snow. For a second, his vision doubled. Seeing the stone fireplace and soft chairs superimposed over the gray concrete and metal bathroom door he realized had been there all along. A plain, ugly rest stop. No fire. No drivers. Just him. He shook his head hard, like clearing water from his ears. Okay, he told the steering wheel. Here we go. He released the brakes, eased the rig toward the exit. The sign at the lot's edge loomed out of the dark. Rest area, 4-7, no overnight parking. The words flickered in his headlights, then were gone. Back on the highway the storm roared. Visibility shrank to a few truck lengths. The wind shoved. The road glimmered that particular slick black that meant trouble. But now he knew. At kilometer 231, he dropped his speed to a crawl, hazard lights strobing, refusing to take the curve at anything above a walking pace. Twice he felt the trailer twitch, hungry for a slide, but the chains bit and he held. When a pair of taillights appeared ahead, he did not follow them blindly. He kept his own line, his own speed. When he saw the plow turn out with its tempting flat spot, he didn't pull in to chain up. He rolled past and found another wide shoulder with better sight lines, forcing himself to take the time, fingers numb, metal biting his hands as he wrapped the chains. He ignored the logbook's beeping, the little imaginary voice of dispatch scolding in his head. He listened instead to the storm, to the road, to the kind of warnings you only heard once and never forgot, unless you ended up in a place like Rest Stop 47. Hours later, when the snow finally thinned and the sky bruised from black to gray, the lights of Anchorage glowed low on the horizon. Jonah pulled into the yard, killed the engine, and sat there for a long moment, hands still on the wheel. On his dash, the dashcam's last still frame of the rest area flickered. In the grainy image, for just a heartbeat, he thought he saw figures in the empty lot, shapes clustered near where his truck had been, watching him go. He raised 2 fingers in a tired, grateful salute. Thanks for the heads up, he said. Then he climbed down into the waking world, the snow squeaking under his boots, leaving behind a rest stop that most maps would never show. and a warm, impossible lobby full of drivers who would never quite stop hoping the next set of headlights coming down the ramp would decide to stay. Story 5. The Thing Under the Ice, Cargo That Won't Stay Still. Ethan Harlow had hauled a lot of strange loads in 15 years on Alaskan roads, explosives to mines, prefabs for remote villages, even an entire helicopter fuselage once. But none of those jobs had ever come with a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to choke a moose. He signed it anyway. The pay was too good. Triple rate plus hazard bonus for a single run up the Richardson Highway, then onto a series of smaller roads that didn't even have names on his GPS. One load. One night. Am I taking weapons? He'd asked the woman in the parka at the military depot in Fairbanks. Her badge said DOI, Arctic Division, but she moved like someone who'd spent more time in war zones than in offices. Nothing you need to know how to shoot, she said. Container stays sealed at all times. No stops unless you absolutely have to. No deviations from the route. You check in on satellite phone every 60 minutes. You don't discuss this with anyone after delivery. Understood? What is it then? She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. Organic sample, she said finally. From a deep permafrost core. Sensitive to temperature. Biolab stuff, Ethan said, trying to shrug off the prickle at the back of his neck. Got it? He signed the last page. They rolled out the container. It didn't look like science. It looked like a bank vault built by someone who didn't trust banks. Steel walls, dull and thick, with bands of reinforced plating crisscrossing the sides. No windows. No visible hinges. Just a single heavy door with 3 locking bars and a panel of green and red indicator lights. A tiny digital screen read -12 degrees Celsius. That temperature cannot change, the woman said, her gloved finger resting on the screen. There's a climate unit built into the container. Your trailer's been modified with additional power feed to keep it running. If anything on this panel goes red, you call us immediately. Seems like overkill for someone's frozen dirt, Ethan muttered. She looked at him for a long moment. In the sickly yard light, her eyes seemed too sharp. Mr. Harlow, she said quietly, if I were you, I would treat this like it's dangerous. Because it is. The way she said it sank past his bravado and lodged somewhere in his ribs. He watched them winch the container into his trailer and lock it down over the axles. He checked the chains himself out of habit. Solid. Nothing that heavy was moving by accident. Sunset was already staining the snow pink by the time he rolled out of the yard and pointed the nose of his truck south, then east, then north again, following the route they'd loaded into his satellite navigation. Frozen rivers, mountain passes, stretches of road where the only light came from your own headlights and the faint shimmer of the aurora. He'd driven most of them before. He told himself this was just another weird government job. He stopped telling himself that when the container moved. The first thump came just past midnight. He was crossing a frozen lake. A wide, flat expanse the road cut straight over, the ice beneath him thick enough to support a convoy. The temperature outside read -27 degrees Celsius. The air had that dry, sharp smell like broken glass. Ethan had the radio off. Too remote for stations, too early to bother dogging other truckers on the CB. The only sound was the steady growl of the engine and the faint whine of studs on ice. Thump. The truck jolted. Not much, just a shiver through the frame like something heavy had shifted in the trailer. Ethan frowned, eyes flicking automatically to his mirrors. The container's outline was a dark block in the glow of his marker lights, chained where he'd left it. Weight moves, chain strain. He should have heard something more than that single, solid thud if it had slipped. Another thump, directly behind his cab. Ethan gripped the wheel a little tighter. Road's just rough, he told himself. Ice expansion. Old ruts. Except the highway across this lake was smooth. He knew it. He could feel it. Then came the third sound, and it wasn't a thump this time. Something like a slow, dragging scrape along the trailer floor. Ethan swallowed. Reached for the satellite phone clipped to the dash, thought about calling the woman from DOI. What was he going to say? Hi, so, your big scary science box is making noises like it's walking around back there? He told himself he was tired. Hearing things. He'd been up since 5 that morning after all. He drove on. The noises stopped when they reached land again. By the time he pulled into a plowed turnout an hour later for his scheduled check-in, he'd almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. He climbed down, boots crunching in squeaky sub-zero snow, his breath puffing pale. The sky above was clear, the stars bright and cruel. Aurora veiled the horizon like faint green smoke. The container hummed softly when he approached, the internal climate unit working to keep its cargo at that perfect sub-zero. The screen still read -12 degrees Celsius. all lights green. He laid a gloved hand against the steel wall. It was warm. Not hot, but wrong for metal on a night like this. Heat flowed out of it, faint but steady, a living warmth that had nothing to do with machinery. Ethan jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. "Climate unit," he muttered. "Just the climate unit." Nobody had said the box would radiate heat. He did not call the DOI woman. He told himself it was because everything still red-green. In his gut, he knew it was also because he didn't want to give her a reason to tell him to turn around, to keep driving, to get closer to whatever waited at the end of this road. Back in the cab, he checked in on schedule, coordinates, weather, everything normal. He didn't mention the warmth or the noise. He drove on. The pattern became clear after the second lake. Every time they crossed thick, solid ice, real depth, not just a skim on a pond, the container woke up. Thumps. Scrapes. Once, something that sounded disturbingly like a low, resonant knock, as if someone inside had pressed their ear to the metal and rapped back at the world. Between lakes, on rock and snow-packed gravel, it was quiet. The temperature readout never changed. Always minus 12 degrees Celsius. No alarms, no flashing red. But when he touched the steel, the warmth was there. Growing. By 3 in the morning, with the sky a velvet void and the northern lights writhing brighter, Ethan's nerves felt like frayed wiring. He caught himself muttering under his breath. Just a sample. Just dirt. Maybe bugs. Frozen bugs. Nothing that can move. Thump. The entire truck shivered. He flinched, swore, and finally grabbed the sat phone. The call clicked through static before connecting. Arctic Division Transport, came the woman's voice, flat and alert. "Status, Mr. Harlow?" "Truck's fine," Ethan said. "Road's fine. But this container..." "All readings are green on our end," she cut in. "Internal temperature nominal, climate systems functioning. Are you seeing different?" The little screen on his interior monitor mirrored hers. Green across the board. "It's moving," he said. He could hear how that sounded even as the words left his mouth. "I'm hearing things. Impact. Scraping. And it's warm. The walls are warm." She went quiet for a moment. "You are crossing the second major ice body now?" she asked. "Yes." "Noted," she said. "Mr. Harlow, I'm going to tell you something that does not leave this line. Understood?" His mouth was dry. "Sure." "The sample is not inert," she said. "We have reason to believe it retains some metabolic activity when in proximity to certain environmental conditions. The warming is expected." "What kind of sample are we talking about?" Ethan asked. "Your contract does not require that information," she said. "What it requires is that you stay on the plotted route. Do not stop on any frozen river beyond the designated crossings, especially the Sagavanirktok segment. The ice load is unpredictable." "Repeat that back to me." He frowned. "The Sagi what now?" "The Sagavanirktok River sector," she said. "You'll be parallel to it in approximately 3 hours. There will be unmarked access routes onto the ice. You stay on the road, Mr. Harlow. No shortcuts on the river. It is structurally unsafe." "Repeat it back." He repeated it. She thanked him, reminded him of the next check-in, and cut the connection. Ethan stared at the dead phone, then at the dark road ahead. It bothered him that she'd known exactly when the container would start knocking. It bothered him more that she seemed less worried about whatever was in the steel box than she was about him driving on a frozen river. He drove on. The black substance appeared just before dawn. He pulled into another turnout for a quick check, more out of frayed nerves than schedule. The eastern sky was beginning to pale, a faint bruise of color over the endless white. Wind cut at his exposed skin like razors. He unlocked the trailer doors and cracked them just enough to peer inside. The container loomed in the glow of his flashlight, steel skin gleaming dully. The air inside the trailer was surprisingly warm, like stepping into a room someone had just left. He almost didn't see the stain at first. A dark line smeared along the trailer floor, starting from beneath the container's front edge and stretching toward the door. Oil, he thought automatically. Hydraulic leak. He crouched, frowning, and touched it with a gloved fingertip. It wasn't oil. Black, yes, but thicker, tackier. It clung like blood, except when he lifted his hand, fine tendrils stretched and snapped with an almost elastic texture. The smell hit him a second later. Not diesel, not machine oil. Something mineral, almost metallic, layered over with a sour note that made his eyes water. A droplet broke free and hit the cold metal of the latch. By the time it ran half an inch, it had refrozen into a jagged, crystalline smear, like obsidian frost. Ethan's stomach clenched. He swept his flashlight along the floor. More of the stuff had oozed from under the container in rough streaks, then frozen. The trails overlapped, branching. At first they looked random. Then he realized they formed lines. Sharp, intersecting lines. Claw marks. Three-pronged, raking scars, etched in solidified black ice across the trailer floor. His brain refused to slot that into anything sensible. He slammed the doors shut, hands trembling. The knock that came from inside the container then wasn't loud, but it was perfectly timed, like a reply. Knock, knock, knock. He backed away until his boots hit hard snow. His breath fogged in front of him in harsh, shallow puffs. Okay, he whispered to the truck, to the sky, to the frozen world. Okay, no. He almost climbed back into the cab and turned around right then. Hazard pay be damned. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong on any road. The sat phone buzzed in his pocket. He yanked it out like a lifeline. Yeah. Mr. Harlow, the woman's voice said. Your trailer doors just registered a pressure change. Did you open them? He stared at the rear doors. Had to check the load, he said. I think there's a leak. Do not open the container, she said sharply. Under no circumstances. You are within 2 hours of the Sagavanirktok sector. You must not deviate from the highway when you reach it. Is that clear? You keep saying that, Ethan snapped. Fear curdled into anger. What is so special about that river? The ice is unstable, she repeated, and the currents below are extremely strong. If you take that vehicle onto the river and the ice fails, we will lose the sample. There it was. Not we might lose you. How dangerous is this thing? He demanded. For the first time he heard something like hesitation in her voice. It is resilient, she said, and adaptive. If containment fails, do not let it contact organic tissue. The environment you are in now is not sufficient to neutralize it. But the river is? He asked. Silence. Click. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, at his reflection in the dark screen, at the road sign half buried in snow ahead that told him the Sagavanirktok wasn't far now. A thought slid into his mind, unwanted and cold. If the only thing that can kill whatever's in that box is a long, fast, brutally cold river, why had they warned him so hard not to use it? The answer came not in words, but in the next wave of thumps from the container as he pulled back onto the road. They weren't random now. They had a rhythm. As he drew closer to the stretch where the highway paralleled the Sagavanirktok, the knocking intensified. Always when the river drifted into view through the trees, he could feel the pull. The idea creeping into his thoughts like a suggestion he'd made to himself. Cut down one of the access trails to the river. The ice will hold. Get off this cursed road, away from the empty sky. Slide the truck out onto the flat white. Use the river. The voice in his head was his. But the urgency wasn't. The container thumped hard enough that he felt it through the seat. Images flashed behind his eyes, cracks spidering across ice, black water foaming, something enormous and dark twisting below like a shadow without a source. Ethan gritted his teeth. Not my job, he growled as much to the box as to himself. I was hired to haul. Not to drown whatever science project you are. Another image flooded his mind, hotter this time. Ice caves glowing with a pale inner light, something buried in blue-white depths twitching for the first time in millennia as a drill bit kissed its surface. Flesh that wasn't flesh. Thoughts like slow glaciers waking. He realized with a lurch that his hands had begun to turn the wheel toward a faint snow-covered track leading down toward the river. He yanked it back, swearing. The suggestion in his mind turned sharp, pained, then pleading. He felt it like a pressure behind his eyes. Down. Onto the river. Let me go. Let it take me. The thing in the container wasn't trying to escape the truck. It was begging him to put it somewhere it couldn't survive. The ice, the current, the grinding, crushing cold. They're not warning me for my sake, he muttered. They're warning me for yours. He pictured the woman at DOI, her tight face, her precise words. Losing the sample. Not losing lives. They dug something up. Something that didn't die when it should have. Something now awake enough to know it was a danger. And the only thing that could kill it was the one route on the map his handlers had forbidden him to take. The road curved again. A green sign half swallowed by snow flashed past. River access, unmaintained, use at own risk. The container shuddered. The air in the cab grew almost suffocatingly warm, his breath fogging the windshield despite the defroster. He drove past the turn. His knuckles were white on the wheel. The psychic pressure behind his eyes turned from pleading to something like resignation. Sorry, buddy, Ethan said hoarsely. I get what you're asking. But if I drive this rig onto the river and go through, nobody comes looking for me. Nobody makes sure you actually sink. And maybe you claw your way out downstream where there's people. I'm not smart, but I'm not that stupid. The knock that came next was so soft he barely heard it. It sounded disappointed. Or maybe he was just putting human feelings on something that didn't have a face. Either way, the pressure in his head eased. The warmth from the container pulled back, like a hand withdrawing from a hot stove. For the rest of the drive, it was quiet. No more thumps. No more rhythmic knocks. No more suggestions pressing against the inside of his skull. The facility, when he finally saw it, was little more than a cluster of low, snow-buried buildings, glass domes reflecting the pale winter sun, antennae bristling at the horizon. Armed guards waved him through 2 gates. Scientists in parkas stood waiting as he backed the trailer into a loading bay. The DOI woman was there, breath fogging in sharp bursts. "Any incidents?" she asked as soon as he climbed down. He looked at the container. At the faint, black stains still etched into the trailer floor, refrozen into claw-like scars. "Your box leaks," he said. "You might want to fix that." Her jaw tightened. "Did you leave the route?" He thought of the unmarked river access, the weight of something in his mind asking him to kill it. "No," he said. "I did exactly what you paid me to do." She studied him for a long moment, eyes searching his face for cracks. "Good," she said finally. "We'll take it from here." He watched as they unchained the container and rolled it into the facility. For just a heartbeat, as it passed beneath a bank of fluorescent lights, he thought he saw the steel breathe. The surface pulsed outward a fraction, then settled. The digital readout still said -12 degrees Celsius. He turned away. On his way back down the Richardson Highway, empty trailer rattling behind him, Ethan kept his radio off and his eyes on the road. He crossed the Sagavanirktok sector again in daylight. The river ran black and fast beneath scabbed-over plates of ice, its surface grinding in slow, powerful shifts. He imagined for a second what would have happened if he'd listened to the thing in the box and taken the truck out there. Maybe the ice would have held just long enough. Maybe it would have broken early. Maybe the container would have torn open like a tin can as it went under. Maybe whatever was inside would have gotten exactly what it wanted, a burial deep enough and cold enough to finally stop it. Or maybe it would have learned to swim. He drove on, leaving the river behind, the memory of claw marks and knocking locked somewhere in the back of his mind with everything else the road had shown him that he'd never talk about. He didn't know which scared him more, that the thing under the ice wanted to die, or that the people who dug it up didn't plan on letting it. Story 6. Headlights in the rearview. The convoy that isn't there. Jake Morrell had always said the worst thing about the Alaskan tundra wasn't the cold, or the ice, or the isolation. It was the silence. The kind that pressed against the windows at 3 in the morning, swallowing the hum of the engine and turning every mile marker into a reminder that if something happened out here, nobody would find you until spring thaw. He'd been driving since noon the previous day, running a load of fuel and supplies from Fairbanks out toward a remote site past Deadhorse. The Dalton and the spur roads that came after were never friendly, but in early February they were downright hostile. Endless white, endless dark, and a sky so low it felt like it might crush you. His logbook was tight but legal. He had maybe 2 hours before he'd have to park and grab a mandatory rest. The problem was there was nowhere to park. The last proper turnout had been 40 miles back, and his dispatcher had warned him the next one was iffy this time of year. If the plows hadn't cleared it, he'd be boxed in by drifts. So he kept rolling. The CB was silent. No chatter on 19, no bored drivers trading gossip or weather updates. Just static. His phone had been out of range for hours. "Should have brought another audiobook," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. The dash clock glowed 3:07 a.m. Outside, the world was a tunnel of headlights and blowing snow. The road rose and fell in gentle swells, lined by low, ghostly shapes of buried shrubs and the occasional hulking silhouette of a snow berm. Beyond that, nothing. Just the impression of flat tundra stretching to the edge of the world. Beyond, jaw-cracking. "Come on, Jake," he told himself. "Stay sharp. 2 hours. You can do 2 hours standing on your head." His eyelids grew heavy anyway. That soft, treacherous weight he recognized immediately. Highway hypnosis, the slow drift of a brain that had stared at too many identical lines for too long. He lowered the window an inch. Freezing air knifed in, stinging his cheeks. It helped, but only for a few minutes. He was considering pulling onto the shoulder, illegal, dangerous, but maybe less dangerous than falling asleep behind the wheel, when his mirror lit up. Headlights. At first just one pair, distant but distinct, cresting a rise behind him. Then another. Then 2 more. Within 30 seconds, there was a neat little string of white points stretched out behind his trailer, hovering in his mirrors like a necklace of light. Jake felt something loosen in his chest. Finally, he breathed. Another trucker out here meant company. A whole small convoy meant safety. More sets of eyes, more tires feeling for slick spots, more voices on the radio to keep him awake. He grabbed his CB handset and thumbed it on. Breaker 1 to 9, he said, voice a bit rough. Northbound on the Hall Road about, I dunno, 70 out from Dead Horse. Who's that stacked up behind me? For a moment there was only static. He almost thought nobody would answer. Then a man's voice crackled through, warm and amused. Copy that, northbound. This is Hammerhead in the Blue Peak right on your 6. We've got 2 more rigs and a straight truck behind me. We looked lonely up there. Jake let out a short laugh that was more relief than humor. This is Roadrunner, he said, giving his handle. Didn't think anyone else was crazy enough to run this stretch tonight. A different voice chimed in, female, with a mild southern lilt that sounded wildly out of place this far north. Crazy loves company, sugar, she said. Name's Sparrow. I'm 2 back from you. You're drifting 1 foot left every few minutes. You tired or you drunk? Tired, Jake admitted. Been staring at white for too long. Stick with us, the first voice, Hammerhead, said. We'll talk you awake. Next safe turnout's another hour up. Storm's moving east behind us. As if on cue, fat flakes began to drift through his beams, thickening the tunnel. Jake straightened in his seat. All right then, he said. Appreciate the company. For the next half hour, the CB came alive. Hammerhead told a story about a guy who tried to put chains on without gloves at 40 below and had to be pried off his own rig, skin stuck to the steel. Sparrow countered with a tale about a moose that refused to leave the middle of the road, forcing a whole convoy to creep behind it at 10 miles an hour for 20 miles. Another driver, who called himself Bearcat, chimed in occasionally from farther back. His voice was low and slow, words spaced out like he was chewing on each one before he let it go. They warned him about ice patches, black glass coming up in about 6 miles, Roadrunner, weight it down and don't break, and called out animals he hadn't even seen yet. Caribou on the right shoulder, up ahead of you, Sparrow said at one point. 2 of them. They like to jump last second, so don't spook when they move. Sure enough, 20 seconds later, 2 pale shapes surfaced in his beams, heads down, kicking through the snow at the road's edge. Jake's skin prickled. Y'all got night vision goggles or what? He asked. Hammerhead laughed. Old eyes, friend. Old roads. The miles slipped by. Jake's exhaustion retreated under the steady flow of voices. They weren't talking about anything important. Weather, weird loads they'd hauled, the worst coffee at the worst truck stops. But the sheer presence in his ears kept his brain from turning to mush. Roadrunner, cut a little right, Bearcat murmured once. Mini drift building up on your left lane mark. That'll yank you if you hit it wrong. Jake adjusted. The truck rode smoother. How the hell did you see that? He asked. Been down this path a long time, Bearcat said. Somewhere around 4 a.m. The snow thickened abruptly. His beams shortened as if they were hitting cotton. Whiteout starting, Sparrow warned. It's gonna get worse before it gets better. You staying on 11 all the way or you cutting off at Spur? Spur. Jake frowned. Dispatcher said stay on the main. Static hissed, then Hammerhead came in, firmer now. Listen close, Roadrunner, he said. About 15 miles up, there's a right-hand exit. Little thing, sign half buried. Says, Service Spur East Basin. You're gonna see it. You do not take it. Copy that, Jake said automatically. Why? Because it doesn't go where you think anymore, Bearcat said. Road's there on the map, but it ain't there when the fog's up. You hear me? Sparrow's voice layered in, suddenly serious, almost sharp. Stay on the main, Jake, she said, using his real name. Doesn't matter what your GPS says. Doesn't matter what your dispatch says. Doesn't matter if you see tail lights going up that ramp. You stay straight. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. I don't recall telling y'all my name, he said slowly. Silence crackled for a beat too long. Then Hammerhead chuckled, but the sound didn't reach his words. Relax, Roadrunner, he said. We all end up knowing each other on this stretch. You run it a few seasons, the road learns your name too. Jake forced a laugh, but unease settled under his ribs. Outside, the world vanished. The snow turned to a white curtain, swirling in mad circles in his beams. The sky and ground fused into a single glowing blur. His sense of motion narrowed down to the faint vibration under his feet and the ghost of a centerline flashing in and out of sight like a fading pulse. Easy now, Bearcat said softly. Hands loose. Don't fight the wind. Let the weight do the work. Something bumped his trailer, just a nudge like a strong gust or a patch of uneven snow. His heart lurched. "I got you," came Hammerhead's voice instantly. "Little crosswind off the left. It'll die down in a minute. You're still centered. Don't break." Jake realized then that he hadn't actually seen any of their rigs. In his mirrors there had only ever been headlights. He could make out the glow of them, lined up nice and tidy, but the shapes around those lights were swallowed by blowing snow and darkness. He just assumed they were trucks like his. "Hey Hammerhead," he said. "Where you folks headed after this? We all going to Dead Horse?" Silence. Then Sparrow said, "Depends where you decide to go, sugar." The clock on his dash read 4:26 a.m. The whiteout deepened. Snowflakes streaked sideways. The edges of the world closed in. "Exit's coming up," Hammerhead said, voice flat now. 3 miles. Sign's gonna pop up on your right with maybe half its letters showing. You're gonna feel like you want off this road. Like if you just turn off, the wind'll ease and you can breathe. That's the road talking. Don't listen." Jake swallowed. "How do you know what I'm gonna feel?" "Because we all felt it," Bearcat said. His slow drawl had an iron core now. "And we all made a choice." Sparrow's voice dropped to a near whisper. "We didn't say, 'Stay with us,' Jake. We said, 'Stay on the main.' There's a difference." A faint glow appeared through the snow on the right. A sign, half buried, its upper corner sticking out of the drift. The beam caught just enough to read, "Revice SP, Eastby." He could barely see the curve of the exit ramp itself, a slightly darker patch of snow curving away into the swirling white. His GPS chirped on the dash, the cheap synthesized voice muffled by static. "In 1 mile, turn right onto Service Road." Of course it did. The route planner always tried to shave miles where it could. He'd ignored plenty of those suggestions before. "Stay on the main," Hammerhead said again. "Straight ahead. Don't touch that wheel." But Jake's hands were already shifting. Not entirely by choice. In the dense white, the ramp looked inviting. The storm seemed thicker over the highway, heavier somehow. Off to the right, the snow looked calmer, less whipped. Safe. He felt an irrational certainty that if he took that ramp, visibility would improve. His chest would loosen. The road would be easier. "You said next turnout's an hour away," Jake said. His own voice sounded strange to his ears, distant. "If I take the spur, there's maintenance stations out there. Places to rest. Fuel." "There were," Bearcat said. "Once." His grip tightened on the wheel. "That fog doesn't let go," Sparrow said. "Not on that road. You slide into it, you stay. You don't want to find out what happens when you can't see the truck in front of you or behind you anymore." Jake's throat worked. "But I'm not in a convoy," he said suddenly. Just me." The radio went dead silent. The ramp loomed. The GPS repeated its instruction, voice flattening into a harsh buzz as interference crept in. "Turn right, turn right, turn." In his mirrors, the line of headlights behind him seemed closer. Too close. A weird, tingling chill crawled up Jake's spine. "Just answer me one thing," he said, hands trembling on the wheel. "If I take that exit, what happens?" For a moment he thought they wouldn't reply. Then Hammerhead spoke very quietly. "You'll stop being lonely," he said. "You'll never drive alone again." "Not really." Jake forced a dry laugh. "Hell of a sales pitch." Sparrow's voice cut in, brittle around the edges. "Don't," she said. "Please. You don't have to test this road the way we did." "The way we did." The words lodged in his brain like ice. He saw it then, not with his eyes, but with that gut-deep sense every driver developed after enough miles. The phantom impression of a wreck. Trucks sliding into each other in a curtain of white, one after another, no time to react, metal crushing, fuel spilling, the world narrowing to headlights and then nothing. A pileup. On a spur road. In fog that never really lifted. His right hand twitched on the wheel. The truck drifted an inch toward the ramp. Somewhere under the terror and exhaustion, anger flared. At the road. At the weather. At whatever cruel twist of fate thought it was funny to dangle safety and company in front of a worn-out man at 3-something in the morning. He yanked the wheel back to center. "Negative," he said through gritted teeth. "Staying on 11." For a half-second he could have sworn the truck fought him, like a subtle lean, a suggestion in the physics that wanted toward the right. Toward the exit. He held steady. The ramp slid by in a ghostly blur. The sign vanished into the snow. In the mirrors, the line of headlights behind him didn't turn either. They just kept following. Or maybe that was just his imagination. It was hard to tell where the real ended and the white began. No one spoke on the CB for a long minute. Then Bearcat exhaled, the sound audible over the line. "Attaboy," he said softly. The whiteout didn't ease. If anything, it got worse for a while, the world narrowing to the hood of his truck and the vaguest suggestion of snow stakes at the road's edge. His shoulders ached from tension, but he kept rolling. Somewhere around 5:30 a.m., the snow began to thin. The sky lightened from ink black to deep blue. By the time the first pale line of dawn crept across the horizon, he could see more than 100 feet ahead again. Shapes emerged out of the gray, a blown-in sign, a rusted-out grader half buried in a drift, the marker for the promised turnout. It was plowed, surprisingly. The packed snow gleamed under his beams like concrete. "Turnout on your right, Roadrunner," Hammerhead said. "This one's real. You made it. You want to pull in, catch a nap, now's your shot." Jake's entire body screamed yes. He flicked on his indicator and eased right. The rig rumbled gratefully onto the flat pad. He set his brakes, felt the truck settle. "Appreciate the escort," he said, voice thick with fatigue and genuine gratitude. "Didn't think I'd make that last stretch without dozing off." Static hissed. Then Sparrow said, quiet and almost wistful, "You listened." "Most don't." "Most?" he repeated, frowning. "How many?" The CB cut out with a hard pop, like someone had yanked the mic out of the radio. Jake blinked. "Breaker 1 to 9, you still there?" he asked. "Hammerhead? Bearcat? Sparrow?" "Nothing. Just empty static." He looked up into his mirrors, expecting to see the chain of headlights swinging out to continue north. The highway behind him was empty. No trucks. No glow of taillights fading in the distance. No tire tracks being filled by drifting snow. Just blank, untouched road. A slow, cold sensation slid down his spine. He stepped out of the cab on unsteady legs. The air bit his face. He walked to the edge of the turnout and stared at the highway. His tire tracks were the only ones visible. A single set of grooves leading up from the south, none joining from behind. Nothing about that made sense. He'd seen those lights. He'd felt the bumps of wind off other rigs. He'd heard their voices. "Storm plays tricks," he muttered weakly. "Whiteout messes with depth perception. Maybe they turned off somewhere. Maybe..." But he knew. Later that morning, after a 3-hour nap that did nothing to shake the unease, a state trooper swung by the turnout on patrol. Jake, still rattled, asked him offhand if they'd had many trucks through the night. "Just you," the trooper said. "GPS logs and check-ins show one commercial vehicle on this stretch between midnight and 6. Your company rig." "What?" Jake opened his mouth, closed it again. "No reason," he said. "Just felt like more." The trooper gave him a look, the kind that said he'd heard stranger things on these roads and didn't want to know more unless he had to. "You run this stretch long enough," he said. "You'll hear all kinds of stuff on that radio. Some of it's even real." He drove away in a swirl of snow. Jake stood there for a long moment, listening to the fading rumble. That night, in a diner in Deadhorse, he overheard 2 older drivers talking at the next table. They were swapping memories of the East Basin pileup, some whiteout disaster years ago when a chain reaction on an unmaintained spur road had taken out half a dozen trucks at once. "Fog so thick you couldn't see your own mirror," one said. "That whole spur's cursed now. Dispatch doesn't route us there anymore. Hell, I heard of a guy who swears he still hears CB chatter from that night when he goes past the turn." The other driver snorted. "Ghost stories." Jake stirred his coffee, hand shaking slightly. He thought of Hammerhead's voice. Of Sparrow begging him not to test the road the way they had. Of Bearcat saying we all made a choice. He also thought of the way they talked him through the dark, called out dangers he couldn't see, kept him awake when his body wanted to shut down. They hadn't tried to trick him into the exit. They'd warned him away from it. Over and over. Not because they wanted him to join them. Because the road wanted that. They were just watching. To see which way he'd turn. The next time he ran that stretch, and there would be a next time. This was his job, his route, his life. He knew he'd look for those headlights in his mirrors around 3 in the morning. Part of him hoped he'd hear those familiar voices, lazy and warm in the static, telling him where the ice was and when the caribou were near. Another part of him prayed he never would. Because if the convoy came back, it meant they were still out there, somewhere between the static and the snow. Drivers who'd never finished their run, still trying to keep other fools from following them into the fog that had taken them. And if one night he found his hands turning toward that ramp again, if loneliness and exhaustion ever outweighed fear, he had a feeling they'd be right there in his ear. Not protecting him from the road. Just watching to see if he'd finally choose theirs. Story 7. The town that only exists at night, gas station to nowhere. Ethan Raymer hit the low fuel warning 30 miles earlier than he should have. The chime on his dash cut through the dull hum of his engine, and the amber light flickered on with a little accusing glow. Low fuel again out in the middle of nowhere. "Come on," he muttered at the gauge as if guilt might magically push the needle back up. "You were supposed to get me to talk." He'd miscalculated. Alaska always punished miscalculations. The cold, the grades, the gusting headwinds, something had sucked more diesel than he'd accounted for, and now, somewhere between Delta Junction and nothing, his truck was telling him he had maybe 40 miles left in the tank. The nearest marked fuel stop on his GPS was 60 miles ahead. The last one behind him was almost 80 miles back. Perfect, he sighed. Outside, the world was black and white. A two-lane highway cutting through endless snowfields, scraggly tree limbs like ink scratches against a starless sky. It was 12:49 a.m. according to the glowing digits on his dashboard. The kind of hour where you started bargaining with machines and making promises to roads. He checked his mirrors. Nobody behind him. Nobody ahead. 410 more miles, he drove with one eye on the fuel gauge, watching it slide down in tiny, merciless increments. The chimes sounded again, more insistent. His range estimate on the display dropped from 33 miles to 19, then to 11, far faster than it should have. "Okay," he said aloud. "Okay, I get it. I screwed up." That was when he saw the light. At first it was just a faint amber glow on the horizon to his right, too steady and warm to be the aurora or some distant vehicle. As he crested a low rise, the glow brightened, resolving into something that looked a lot like a small town nestled in a shallow valley. He blinked, leaned forward. There, clearly visible once the trees thinned, was a cluster of buildings, lit by old-fashioned street lamps that threw golden pools of light onto what looked like a main street. Neon smeared the darkness in soft reds and blues. A big sign by the highway appeared out of the snow. "Welcome to Bristow, POP 1204, open 24 hours. Ethan frowned. He tapped his GPS. The unit chirped, map zooming out, but the space where the town should be was blank. No side road. No labeled community. Just wilderness. "Come on," he muttered, zooming in, dragging the map with a gloved finger. "You gotta have something." Nothing appeared. The highway was a solitary gray ribbon. The area to the right was labeled as state forest land. His fuel light remained steadily on. The range read 7 miles. That settled it. If the choice was between trusting a glitchy GPS or an actual visible gas station, he knew which way he was turning. Up ahead, a secondary road branched off, a plowed two-lane leading toward the lights. A smaller sign under the town marker read, "Fuel, food, lodging, next right." He slowed, turned his blinker on, and eased onto the side road. His tires crunched over packed snow. The closer he got, the stranger it felt. It didn't look like any Alaskan town he knew. Bristow's main street rose into view like something lifted out of an old photograph. Two-story brick storefronts with painted signs, big bay windows, and awnings dusted with frost. Strings of incandescent bulbs crisscrossed between lampposts, giving the snow a warm, honey-colored glow. There was a diner on the corner with a neon sign that read Millie's in soft pink cursive, and beyond that, an old-school Texaco-style gas station with a rounded awning, glass-fronted office, and 4 pumps lined neatly in a row. The pumps were lit. The station sign rotated lazily, the logo glowing like it was 1975. He pulled in. The lot was shoveled clear and dry, as if someone had gone over it only minutes before. Inside the station office, he could see a man in a button-down shirt counting a roll of bills at the counter. In the diner's big windows, silhouettes moved, glasses raised, heads thrown back in laughter. The clock on the diner wall, big, round, yellowed with age, read 1:17. He checked his dash. 1:14 a.m. Close enough, he said, more to convince himself than anything. He pulled up to the diesel pump, shut down the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and frying onions, so different from the sharp, sterile bite of the highway. Music drifted from the diner, a tinny jukebox tune he vaguely recognized from his dad's classic rock CDs. Nothing about this place matched the time or the map, but his fuel gauge didn't care about anomalies. His truck needed diesel. The pump was older, mechanical numbers instead of digital readouts, but someone had retrofitted a modern card reader onto the side. He swiped his fuel card, half expecting it to fail. The reader beeped cheerfully and flashed authorized. "Well," he said softly, "that's not ominous at all." He started fueling, watching the numbers click upward. The hose thrummed in his hand. The diesel smelled exactly like diesel. As his tank filled, a man stepped out of the office. He was in his late 50s, hair slicked back, wearing a name tag that read AL in big blocky letters. He grinned like Ethan was a nephew he hadn't seen in years. "Evening, driver?" Al called. "Running late, huh?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Didn't plan on playing chicken with my fuel gauge." Al laughed. "Bristow's good to ya then. We get the strays." He leaned casually on the pump next to Ethan's, breath puffing in the cold. His jacket was a style Ethan had only seen in old movies, thick brown leather, shearling collar yellowed with age. "You headed north?" Al asked. "Talk tonight, then Fairbanks in the morning," Ethan said, then frowned. "Actually, tonight might not be the right word. My sense of time's shot." Al waved a hand. "Oh, it's always late here. You ought to come in for a cup of coffee when you're done. Millie's still pouring. Food's hot, folks are friendly. Storm's coming through near dawn, you'd be better off hanging around till sunup." His tone was casual, but something in the way he said you'd be better off put a tiny hook of unease under Ethan's ribs. "We'll see," Ethan said. "Need to get Miles behind me." Al just smiled like he'd heard that before. "You got time, son. Nobody's in a hurry in Bristow." The pump clicked off. Full. Ethan replaced the nozzle, capped his tank, and hit the button for a receipt. The machine whirred, spit out a thin strip of slightly yellowed paper. He glanced at it. The numbers looked normal: gallons, price per gallon, total. The date, though, made him do a double take. January 17th, 1:17 a.m. He blinked, checked his dash. 1:17 a.m. Must be synced, he muttered. But the paper itself, the font was off, the store address listed a phone number with only 7 digits. No area code. Al didn't seem to notice his hesitation. "Coffee?" he repeated, jutting his chin toward the diner. "On the house for travelers who make it this far after midnight." Ethan's stomach growled right on cue. He realized he hadn't eaten since a gas station burrito around 6 p.m. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, all right. Thanks." He locked his cab and crossed the street. The warmth inside the diner hit him like a blanket. The air smelled like bacon and pancakes, old coffee and maple syrup. Conversation buzzed in the air. Laughter, clinking silverware, the low murmur of old men at the counter arguing about hockey. Every booth was occupied. A young couple in bell-bottoms and denim jackets shared a milkshake beside a big jukebox. 2 guys in grease-stained coveralls hunched over pies at the counter, talking to a waitress in a powder blue dress with her hair in a beehive. Every single clock, there were 3 he could see, read 1:17. "Take a seat, Han," the waitress called, spotting him. Her name tag read Millie. "Anywhere you like." He slid into an empty booth by the window. The vinyl squeaked. Millie appeared seconds later with a steaming mug. "You look half frozen," she said cheerfully. "Coffee first. We'll talk food after." "Thanks," he said. The mug was heavy, old ceramic. The coffee was strong, a little burnt, but real. "What brings you through Bristow this late?" she asked. "Not a lot of folks on the road on a night like this." "Haul from Anchorage," he said. "Heading to Fairbanks. GPS said nothing between here and talk." She sniffed. "Those little computers never know about the places that matter." She flicked her gaze toward the window, where his truck sat gleaming under the station lights. "You should stay till sunrise," she added. "Roads will be slick near dawn. Wind picks up. We've got rooms above the diner if you need a bed. First night's half price for truckers." "I'd better roll after I eat," he said. "Delivery time's tight." Millie's smile didn't falter, but there was something like regret in her eyes. "Well," she said softly, "you do what you think's right, Han." She took his order, a burger and fries, something simple, and vanished toward the kitchen. Ethan stared out the window. The whole town glowed like a movie set. The street was busy, but not in a rushed way, people strolling between storefronts in heavy coats, laughing, talking. An old man swept an already spotless sidewalk. A sheriff's sedan rolled by slowly, lights off, the driver tipping his hat to a couple arm in arm. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. He glanced at the nearest clock again. It hadn't moved since he sat down. He checked his phone. No signal, but the clock read 1:23 a.m. Huh. When Millie brought his food, he nodded toward the clock. "Time stuck?" he asked lightly. "Bad batteries?" She looked up at it, and for a split second, her face went blank. Then she laughed. "Oh, that old thing? Been 1:17 in here as long as I can remember. Some things don't change, I guess." "Yeah," he said slowly. "Guess not." He ate. The burger was good, too good for a forgotten roadside diner. The fries were hot and crisp. The voices around him were comforting in their normalcy. But the unease kept growing. The clothes, the hair, the music, the prices on the menu. He pulled a handful of bills from his wallet to check something. His money looked wrong here. Too new. Too crisp. At the next table, a man in a plaid jacket pulled out his own cash to pay. The bills he set down were old-style notes, smaller portraits, different fonts, denominations that hadn't looked like that in decades. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Hey, Millie?" he asked when she swung by again. "What year is it?" She blinked at him. "Well, honey, it's January." "No, I mean, the year." She smiled like he'd told a joke. "Same as it was yesterday." He tried again. "The calendar?" He pointed at the wall behind her. Her smile faltered. Very slightly. He hadn't noticed the calendar before. January 1974. A thin silence stretched. Then the sound of cutlery resumed, conversation flowing on as if nothing had been said. Millie's smile snapped back into place. "You tired, hon?" she said kindly, like she was humoring a drunk. "You think too hard about time out here, the road'll eat you alive." She took his money without looking at it, made change from a till full of old bills. The coins she dropped into his palm were tarnished, heavier than they should have been. He suddenly needed to be outside. "Thanks for the food," he said, standing too quickly. "I should get going." "You sure you won't stay till sunrise?" she asked, a note of urgency threading under the sweetness. "It's safer." "I'll be fine," he lied. As he stepped out into the cold, every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward him. For a heartbeat, the conversation died. People watched him like someone watching a man step too close to a ledge. Then the door closed, the bell chimed, and the sound cut off. Ethan crossed the street, boots crunching in the snow. The gas station lights hummed. Al stood in the office doorway, hands in his pockets. "You sure?" Al called. "Storm's not friendly tonight." "I've driven worse," Ethan said. Al's smile was sad this time. "Most of us thought that," he murmured. "Drive safe, son." Ethan climbed into his cab, started the engine. The familiar rumble steadied him a little. He checked his gauges, full tank, oil pressure good, temps normal. He looked once more at the town. Everything was exactly as it had been when he pulled in. Same people on the sidewalk. Same sheriff's car easing past. Same flicker of neon in Millie's window. The clock above the diner door still read 1:17. He put the truck in gear and eased back onto the access road toward the highway. As soon as his tires hit the main road, the glow of Bristow shrank in his mirrors. Within seconds, the town lights were swallowed by the dark bend of the trees. By the time he crested the next rise and looked back, there was nothing. No side road. No sign. No town. Just unbroken tree line and the blank, indifferent highway stretching on. His heart hammered. He considered turning back, but what would he find? Another blank patch of snow? He wasn't sure he could handle empty air where a town had been. He drove through the rest of the night with his thoughts chewing at him. By daybreak, he'd convinced himself it was some weird half-dream brought on by exhaustion, bad weather, and stress. His fuel gauge said full. His receipt crinkled in his pocket. But people hallucinated all the time, right? Until he refueled again. The clerk, a bored kid in a hoodie, scanned his previous receipt as part of company protocol. "Where'd you fill up?" the kid asked, squinting at the address. "Never heard of this place." "Bristow," Ethan said. "Out on one between Delta and here." The kid frowned, pulled up a map on his terminal. "Ain't nothing called Bristow on that stretch," he muttered. "You sure?" Ethan didn't answer. He made his delivery in Fairbanks on time. That night, after too little sleep and too much thinking, he found an old computer in the terminal office and started searching. It didn't take long. There had been a town called Bristow, Alaska, population just over 1,000. Founded in the 40s as a logging and service community. It had burned down in 1974. A faulty heater in a boarding house. High winds. Old drywood. Fire trucks unable to get through in time. The news article he found described it as a tragedy that wiped the town from the map in a single night. The date of the fire, January 17, 1974. His skin went cold. He pulled his logbook from his bag with shaking hands. His entry for the previous night, scribbled in his tired handwriting. January 17, 0:37 a.m. Departed Delta Junction January 17, 1:17 a.m. Arrived Bristow, fuel. Not a 17th. Not some random night. The anniversary. He unfolded the receipt from his pocket. The paper was yellower now, edges crispier, like it had aged decades in 24 hours. The ink listing 01/17, 1:17 a.m. was still legible. The pump number was 3. The total gallons matched exactly what his tank should hold from near empty. The phone number listed for the station, when he called it out of morbid curiosity, rang once. Then a recorded voice said, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." The accent, faint under the static, sounded like Al's. He sat there for a long time, the office around him humming with normal daytime noise. The thought came slowly, like ice spreading across a window. They hadn't asked him for much. Stay till sunrise. Keep them company a little longer. Or, failing that, at least buy fuel. He pictured the town blazing against the night, powered by his diesel pumped into ghostly generators, lights burning for one more loop of their final hours. Millie pouring coffee for travelers who almost never stayed. Al leaning on the pumps, asking the same questions. People laughing in the diner, dancing in the jukebox glow, living their last night over and over. A town that only existed between midnight and dawn once a year. And if a driver happened to roll through low on fuel on the right night, well, ghosts needed power from somewhere. On his next run down that highway, Ethan watched the tree line like a hawk as the dash crept toward 1 a.m. His fuel tanks were full, topped off obsessively. He saw nothing but dark forest and snow. No glow. No sign. He didn't decide even then whether he was relieved or disappointed. A part of him almost wanted to see Bristow again, to prove to himself it had been real. To sit at Millie's counter and tell her he knew what night it was, and that he was sorry he couldn't stay. The other part knew that if he saw those warm lights and heard that old jukebox again, he might just turn off the highway and let the town keep a little more of his diesel, and a little more of him. Just long enough to make the clocks move past 1:17. They could. Story 8. Forest of speakers, cry in the trees by the time the clock on his dash flipped to 2:08 a.m. Malik's eyelids felt like they had sand in them. "Come on, man," he muttered to himself, rolling his shoulders. 30 more miles. The electronic logging device screwed into his dash beeped in answer, a bright red warning flashing on the display. Drive time exceeded in 22 minutes, mandatory rest required. He hissed in annoyance. The regulations were there for a reason, he knew that. He'd seen enough wrecks to know what exhausted drivers did to themselves and everyone else. Still, shutting down in the middle of nowhere on a night like this didn't exactly thrill him. Snowflakes streaked through his headlights like comets, not heavy enough to stick yet, but enough to blur the edges of the road. Dark pines loomed up on either side of the two-lane, their branches knitted so tightly the sky above them disappeared. Somewhere ahead lay the Alcan, and beyond that, Alaska. For now, he was still in British Columbia, threading through endless forest that all looked the same. He glanced at the GPS. No towns, no truck stops, no anything for at least 50 miles. Just thin gray lines through a sea of green. The ELD beeped again. Drive time exceeded in 15 minutes. Yeah, I hear you. He needed a pull-off. Somewhere to wedge his rig out of the lane, throw the brakes, and log the 10 hours the law demanded. He told himself he'd done worse. He'd slept on logging spurs and gravel pits and once, memorably, beside a decommissioned way station with raccoons in the dumpster. The road curved, and his headlights swept across a small gravel turnout on the right, a narrow clearing just big enough for a tractor trailer if he parked carefully. A faded metal sign stuck crookedly out of the snow at its entrance. Scenic viewpoint, next right. Someone had spray painted over "Scenic" with black paint and scrawled "Stay away" in jittery letters underneath. Malik's gut tightened. The ELD beeped a third time, insistent as a smoke alarm. Drive time exceeded in 9 minutes. Log off for violation. He slowed anyway. Regulations didn't care about spray paint. Neither did roadside inspectors. "We stop, we sleep, we get the hell out at dawn," he told himself firmly, signaling and easing off the highway. The rig rocked and rumbled as his tires left pavement for gravel. Trees closed in on 3 sides, tall black trunks, branches hanging heavy, blocking out what little starlight there was. The clearing itself was only about 2 truck lengths long and 1.5 wide. Someone had dumped a rusted fridge and a busted snowmobile near the far edge. Malik threaded the rig in, nose toward the highway, back end hemmed in by trees. If he needed to leave fast, at least he wouldn't have to turn around. He set the parking brake with a hiss, killed the engine, and suddenly the world went horribly, deeply quiet. No hum of tires. No wind. No other vehicles passing. Just a thick, cottony silence. He flicked on the sleeper lights to chase the dark back a bit, set his ELD to off-duty, rest brake, and exhale. Just a place to sleep, he said, more to hear his own voice than anything. Nothing more. He locked both doors, checked them twice, then crawled into the sleeper. The thick mattress and faded blue blankets were familiar, comforting. He kicked off his boots, stripped down to thermal long johns, and lay back, listening to the creak of cooling metal. Outside, the forest pressed close. He set his phone alarm for 10:30 a.m. Plenty of time for the mandatory reset, and turned the screen face down. The darkness felt heavier after the last glow vanished. Sleep came slower than he wanted. Every tiny sound made his ears prick up. The pop of a settling board, the faint tick of cooling engine parts. Finally, his breathing deepened and his thoughts began to blur. He wasn't sure how long he'd been out when the scream ripped him awake. It wasn't a subtle sound. It tore right through the thin veil between sleep and waking, pure and high and full of raw, animal terror. A child, he thought immediately. That's a kid. He sat up so fast he smacked his head on the bunk above. His heart hammered loud enough to drown out everything else. For a moment he thought it might have been a dream. Then the scream came again. Closer this time. Help. Somebody please. Help me. Malik's mouth went dry. The voice was small, cracked, the kind of sound that hit something deep in your brain before you could rationalize it. He swung his legs off the bunk and fumbled for his phone. 2:43 a.m. Only about half an hour had passed. Hello? He shouted, throat tight. Who's out there? The only answer was another scream, ragged and desperate. He staggered into the driver's seat and yanked the curtain back. The windshield showed him a wall of trees, their trunks faintly silvered by moonlight. The highway beyond was empty, no headlights coming either way. The kid sounded like they were somewhere off to his left, buried in the forest. Help, please. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to move. He grabbed the heavy mag light he kept in the door pocket, flicked it on, and shone the beam out into the trees. The light caught branches, snow, the skeletal shape of dead undergrowth. Nothing else. You gotta be kidding me, he breathed. Logic tried to wedge itself in front of panic. What was a kid doing out there at this hour? No houses nearby. No cars. No footprints in the snow he could see from here. The scream came again, cracking on the last word. Help me. He almost opened the door. His fingers closed around the handle. Then another sound drifted through the trees. A second scream. Same voice. Same words. Same pattern, right down to the way the last syllable broke. But this one came from further away and a fraction of a second later, like an echo through a canyon. Then a third. Closer again. Help. Somebody please. Help me. Same pitch. Same cadence. Malik froze. He wasn't hearing one kid scream. He was hearing a recording. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to think. Flashlight first. Doors locked second. Stay in the cab. Don't be stupid. He cracked the driver's window just an inch and stuck the flashlight out, sweeping the beam across the nearest trees. Something glinted back at him. High up on the trunk of a pine, maybe 12 feet off the ground, a small black box was nailed into the bark. 2 wires dangled from it, vanishing into the darkness. As he watched, the box emitted sound, its tiny grill vibrating with that same screaming voice. He swung the light right. Another box, nailed higher in a different tree. Well, another. There were at least half a dozen within the circle of his beam alone. All of them were small, black weatherproof speakers, the kind used for outdoor sound systems, staggered at different heights and distances. As the kid's cry played on a loop, each speaker picked it up at a different delay, turning the forest into a layered chorus of identical pleading voices. The skin crawled. Whose idea of a joke was this? He angled the beam lower toward the spaces between the trunks. That was when he saw the figures. At first they were just slightly darker patches in the dark, a hint of shape where shade should have been flat. Then one of them shifted, just enough for the beam to catch the glint of an eye. 5, no 6. Human shapes stood among the trees, half hidden by the undergrowth. They weren't moving toward him. Not yet. They just watched. A couple of them wore dark hoodies. One had a beanie pulled low over his face. Another had something in his hand, a crowbar, maybe, or a length of pipe, the metal catching the light for the briefest second. His hand snapped back inside, window up, locks double-checked. The scream played again. Help. Somebody please. Help me. This time, knowing it was a recording didn't make it any less effective. It was bait, engineered to hit the part of you that reacted before your brain kicked in. He killed the interior lights, leaving only the faint glow of the dash. Okay, he whispered to himself. Okay, this is bad, but you're not dead yet. He considered calling 911, but one glance at the top of his phone told him what he already suspected: no service. The figures in the trees hadn't moved closer, but he had the horrible impression that they were waiting, watching to see if he would open the door. Stepped down onto the gravel. The turnout suddenly felt very small. He could wait. Stay locked in, ride it out until morning, hope they got bored or cold or scared. Or he could try to leave. The thought of easing his 18-wheeler back onto that narrow highway with God knew who lunging out of the trees made his stomach twist. But staying meant sitting immobile in a steel box while armed strangers surrounded him. Another scream. The speakers layered it in waves. Something thumped softly against the back of his trailer. Malik flinched. That decided it. He flipped the ignition. The engine cranked to life with a roar that shattered the eerie quiet. On reflex, he flicked his high beams on too, washing the trees in stark white. The figures flinched back like roaches under a light. He saw them more clearly now. Men in mismatched winter gear, faces obscured by scarves or masks. All of them turned toward his truck. One of them raised a hand to shield his eyes. Another took a step forward, then thought better of it as the truck's diesel shook the ground. Malik released the parking brake and eased his foot onto the accelerator. The rig crept forward. Gravel crunched. Something moved fast at the edge of his vision, a blur darting toward the front of his truck. He punched the horn, the blast tearing through the speaker's loop and echoing into the forest. The figure skidded to a stop right at the edge of his headlight beam, then backed away, hands raised. He didn't wait for a second attempt. He rolled out of the turnout and back onto the highway, tires spitting gravel. In his side mirror, he saw several of the figures break from the trees and run toward the road, but none of them stepped fully into his path. Maybe the size of the truck scared them. Maybe they were only brave when their prey was on foot. The kid's scream followed him faintly for 100 yards, thinning and stretching as he sped away, until it vanished into the night. He didn't slow down for 60 miles. By the time he reached the next RCMP detachment in a town that barely qualified as such, his hands were still shaking on the wheel. He strode into the small, fluorescent-lit lobby and told the officer at the desk everything. Every detail. The speakers. The figures. The way they'd waited. The constable listened, his expression tightening. When Malik described the painted-over sign, the man swore under his breath. "You stopped there?" he asked. "I had to," Malik said. "Hours of service. I thought it was just a normal pull-off until the kid," the officer finished quietly. "You're not the first trucker to hear that voice." Malik swallowed. "What happened to the others?" The constable hesitated, then shook his head. Two never showed up at their next check-in. Their rigs were found stripped and abandoned a few kilometers up from that turnout. No drivers, no bodies. We always suspected somebody was using that spot to bait people, but we could never catch them. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "We'll send a team out now. Come morning we'll have a better look. You'll stick around, give a formal statement?" "Yeah," Malik said, suddenly exhausted. "Yeah, of course." They found him a bunk in the back for a few hours' sleep. When the sun finally clawed its way over the trees and the world turned gray instead of black, they drove out to the pull-off in a convoy of 2 cruisers and Malik's empty cab. The place looked smaller in daylight. Less like a mouth and more like a scar in the trees. The spray-painted sign was there, just like he'd said. So were the rusted appliances, half buried in snow. "Show us," the constable said. Malik pointed out the tree where he'd first seen the speaker. One of the officers trudged over, craning his neck. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. They really went all out. Nailed high in the bark was a black box, about the size of a paperback. Wires dangled from it, encased in cracked plastic tubing. Up close it looked raw. Rust streaked the screws. Moss had grown around the edges where the bark had tried to reclaim it. The grill on the front was smashed inward, like someone had hit it with a rock long ago. "Get me a ladder," the constable called. "And gloves." In the end, they found 10 speakers within the radius of the turnout, all of them nailed into different trees. Every single one showed the same age. Cracked plastic, corroded connections, wire insulation flaking off at a touch. "None of these are live," the tech officer said finally, straightening up with a grunt. "Every line's been severed for years. Whatever setup they had, it's dead now. There's no power." "But I heard it," Malik insisted. "You saw how they were spaced. It sounded like..." "We believe you," the constable said quickly. "We've had other complaints about screams in these woods. Just, we've never found any equipment that could be doing it." He nudged one of the speakers with his boot. It wobbled in the tree, a faint clatter coming from inside. Old as these are, they should have fallen down in the last windstorm. Malik looked from speaker to speaker, heart sinking with a new kind of dread. "So if it's not them," he said slowly, "what's making the sound now?" No one answered. The forest had gone very quiet. No birds. No wind. just the soft crunch of boots in snow and the distant hiss of highway tires. As if in response, a faint sound drifted to them from deeper between the trunks. Help. It was barely louder than a breath. A child's plea, warped by distance but still clear, still hitting that same raw nerve in the gut. The officers all froze. One of them swore under his breath. Probably someone further in, another said automatically, though he didn't take a step toward it. Maybe a camper. The constable's eyes met Malik's. They shared the same unspoken thought. Now that you know the speakers are dead, it shouldn't sound exactly the same. The plea came again, a little louder this time. Somebody please, help me. Same cadence. Same crack on the last word. No metal distortion. No tinny echo. It sounded real. The constable's knuckles had gone white around the handle of his flashlight. All right, he said carefully, voice just a bit too loud. We log this. We mark this turnout off limits, see if we can get it barricaded. And we tell dispatch to route trucks past this stretch at night whenever possible. Are we going in? One of the younger officers asked, nodding toward the direction of the voice. The constable stared into the trees for a long moment. On the wind, or maybe just in Malik's imagination, came the faintest of whispers behind the child's cry. A chorus of lower voices, layered like the speakers had been, all saying the same two words over and over. Come closer. He shivered. No, the constable said finally. Not today. Not half-cocked and understaffed. We'll request a search team do this by the book. They left the speakers where they were for evidence, tagged and photographed. That night, Malik slept in a real bed in a motel with walls that felt too thin and a heater that ticked like cooling metal. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the forest pull off, the black mouths of the speakers nailed into living wood. He thought about the missing truckers, about the rigs found stripped and abandoned. The equipment had been dead for years, but the screaming hadn't stopped. Whatever had learned to mimic the recordings no longer needed wires or power. It had had all the time in the world to practice until it could hit every crack, every whimper, every syllable perfect. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he ever heard a child's voice crying from the trees again on a remote northern road, he would lock his doors, keep his hands on the wheel and drive. Because some things in the dark didn't want to be saved. They wanted you to step just far enough from the safety of steel and light that the forest could close its mouth around you and never let go.